The killings were extremely brutal, bloody, and fast. Nicole Brown Simpson, 35, and her friend Ron Goldman were murdered on June 12, 1994, in front of Brown Simpson's Brentwood, California condominium, while her two children slept inside. Whoever carried out their murders appeared to go straight for the kill. A passerby discovered the victims on the floor, Brown Simpson at the foot of the courtyard stairs, and Goldman nearby, close to some vegetation. The murders would become one of the most notorious crimes in recent U.S. history, with O.J. Simpson, Nicole Brown Simpson's famous ex-husband and former NFL player turned broadcaster and sometimes actor, becoming the leading suspect. In 1977, Nicole was an 18-year-old waitress, and O.J. was still married to his first wife, whom he divorced in 1979. In 1985, Nicole and O.J. were wed. The couple had two children together, but Nicole confided in friends and relatives that he was abusive to her throughout the years. In 1989, O.J. was arrested and entered a no-contest plea in a domestic abuse case. During the 1989 episode of domestic violence, Simpson allegedly kicked and punched Nicole, who reportedly told the authorities, "He's going to kill me." The couple had separated by 1992. In 1993, they tried to reconcile, but it didn't work out. A top investigator said during the so-called trial of the century that O.J. Simpson was the only suspect ever seriously scrutinized for the murders. Simpson was acquitted of the double murders after almost 9 months of testimony. Although Simpson was later held liable for Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman's murders in a civil trial, no other suspects have been identified for the crime of furiously stabbing and slashing her and Goldman. There were no indications of a robbery, a break-in, or any known motivation for the brutal murders. As with all violent crimes or deaths concerning celebrities, their supporters or fans have a hard time believing that someone they've put up on a pedestal can commit any wrongdoings of such a violent nature. This is the perfect environment for the birth of theories that may help absolve their hero's guilt. The O.J. Simpson case is no different. The alternate theories. O.J.'s son was the killer. The alternative theory that has gained the greatest popularity in the mainstream media is private investigator Bill Dear's opinion that O.J. Simpson's firstborn son, Jason Simpson, was the true killer. Dear presented his conclusions in a BBC broadcast titled O.J. Simpson: The Untold Story, and wrote a book titled O.J. is Guilty, but Not of Murder. Jason murdered his stepmother in a fit of jealous anger after she did not attend a family dinner he had organized. According to this theory, O.J. came later to help his son in covering up the murder. The majority of Dear's evidence is circumstantial, including Jason Simpson's purported history of severe mental illness, which, according to Dear's detractors, was acquired unlawfully, as well as flaws in Jason's official alibi. The Independent and the Huffington Post have covered his notion favorably, or at least not wholly suspiciously, although former Village Voice editor Tony Ortega claims the investigation is full of it. Ortega went on to say, Dear's timeline for that night is a complete farce, and his ideas for how O.J. Simpson's blood ended up at the scene are beyond preposterous. O.J. was a subject of the MK Ultra program. There has never been an event in American history without some internet user attributing it to the Illuminati. In the O.J. Simpson case, conspiracy theorists assert that the football player was a subject of the CIA's MK Ultra mind control experiment, a common topic of discussion among those who believe that the world is secretly ruled by a cabal of shadowy elites known as the Illuminati or the New World Order. Project MK Ultra was an illegal human experimentation program designed and carried out by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. Its purpose was to develop techniques and identify drugs that could be used to weaken individuals and coerce confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. Creating zombie assassins to carry out assassinations was also reportedly a project being researched by MK Ultra scientists. The project was started in 1953, scaled down in 1964 and 1967, and ended in 1973. MKUltra employed a variety of techniques to manipulate the mental states and brain functions of its subjects, including the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, notably LSD and other chemicals, electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture. According to proponents of this idea, at the time of the murders, O.J. was under the influence of the Illuminati, who anticipated that his trial would spark a racial war in the United States. If you believe this sounds suspiciously similar to the Manson killings, conspiracy theorists claim that's another sign they're correct. O.J. hired a serial killer. In 2012, a theory circulated in the media claiming that the killings were committed by a prolific serial killer. Clay Rogers, the brother of serial killer Glenn Rogers, claimed in the Investigation Discovery documentary, My Brother the Serial Killer, that Glenn confessed to murdering Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. The Rogers family asserts that Glenn phoned home a few weeks before the murder to say he was partying with Nicole, and receipts show that he was working in Los Angeles at the time. They claim that after being convicted of the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs, Rogers informed police that he had been recruited by O.J. to steal an expensive set of earrings from Brown's condominium and to kill her if she got in the way. There are reasons to doubt Rogers' assertions. After his arrest, he claimed to have killed up to 70 victims, a claim he subsequently recanted. Moreover, the chronology does not make sense, since Rogers was serving a 6-week prison term at the time of the killings. Drug dealers killed Nicole. In 2011, Simpson's attorney F. Lee Bailey proposed a less dramatic explanation about the killing's true perpetrator. According to a 20,000-word article published on his website, Bailey and the rest of Simpson's defense team rejected a number of possible witnesses who may have testified in Simpson's defense at trial. According to Bailey, the defense was concerned that calling further witnesses might result in a mistrial due to jury attrition. One such witness was Tom Lang, a neighbor who would have testified that he saw Nicole Brown Simpson conversing with 2 unknown men outside her apartment on the night of the killings. Bailey said that he believed the 2 men were drug dealers who mistakenly murdered Brown. He declares that he will die defending Simpson against the allegations brought against him. "So long as I am alive," says Bailey, "there will be one person, aside from Simpson himself, who knows from the evidence that he did not kill Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman." The murders of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman using Occam's razor principle. What is Occam's razor principle? The principle gives precedence to simplicity. Of 2 competing theories, the simpler explanation of an entity is to be preferred. The principle is also expressed as entities are not to be multiplied beyond necessity. Using Occam's razor principles in these gruesome murders gives us the most logical sense of events on that night and points to O.J. Simpson as the guilty party. Nicole Brown Simpson dined with her children and family members at the Mezzaluna restaurant in Brentwood about 6:30 p.m. on Sunday, June 12, 1994. Around 8 p.m., they left the restaurant and stopped for ice cream on the way home. At 9:15, one of Nicole's sisters contacted Mezzaluna to inform the restaurant that Nicole's mother had forgotten her glasses there. Ron Goldman, a waiter, volunteered to drop them off with Nicole. At approximately 9:50 p.m., according to the testimony of witnesses at the murder trial, he left the restaurant to return the glasses. The prosecution stated that at about 10:15 p.m., Brown, Simpson, and Goldman were slain. They were stabbed to death outside Nicole Brown Simpson's Brentwood condominium at 880 South Bundy Drive. Simpson's children were asleep inside the house when the murder took place. This timetable, according to the prosecution, would have allowed O.J. Simpson to commit the crime and return to his Brentwood residence, where he was picked up by a limo driver at 11 p.m. Simpson left L.A. on American Airlines Flight 668 at 11:45 p.m., bound for Chicago. According to the general manager of a Chicago airport hotel, O.J. Simpson arrived around 6:15 a.m. Simpson reportedly informed the manager that he was attending the event in his role as a representative for vehicle rental agency Hertz. The manager said he departed around 8:30 a.m. Back in Los Angeles, Pablo Fuente, Brown Simpson's neighbor, said that he heard Brown Simpson's dog, Kato, whimpering at 10:15 or 10:20 p.m. Stephen Schwab, a resident of Nicole Brown Simpson's neighborhood, testified that while walking his own dog at 10:30 p.m., he saw an Akita breed dog with bloody paws. The dog followed Schwab home and refused to return to where it had been discovered. Sucro Bostepi and Bettina Rasmussen, who were his neighbors, volunteered to house the dog overnight. The pair said that they decided to follow the barking and anxious dog, and just before midnight they found the corpses of Brown Simpson and Goldman outside of Brown Simpson's condominium. The Akita was recognized as Kato, Nicole Brown Simpson's dog. Simpson allegedly returned to Los Angeles after being informed of Nicole Brown Simpson's death by police. When Simpson returned to his mansion in Brentwood, about 2 miles from his ex-wife's residence, police arrived and handcuffed him. The police then transported him to headquarters in downtown Los Angeles to conduct a follow-up investigation and to question him as a potential witness. On the morning of June 17th, police contacted one of Simpson's lawyers, Robert Shapiro, to advise him that Simpson had to surrender at 11 a.m., as Simpson was facing murder charges. When Simpson did not surrender by midday, police notified Shapiro that Simpson had been designated a fugitive and proceeded to a residence where Simpson was staying in the San Fernando Valley to arrest him. By the time they arrived, Simpson had already fled with Al Cowlings, a former college and professional football friend. At 5:51 p.m., Simpson allegedly called 911 from his white Ford Bronco, which Cowling was driving, using his mobile phone. Authorities tracked down the car on the Santa Ana Freeway in Orange County after receiving the call. The authorities started chasing Simpson's automobile at 5:56 p.m. The pursuit through the streets of Los Angeles was seen by people all around the world as it happened. The event was televised live by television stations, interrupting the 1994 NBA Finals. The event was billed the most famous ride on American shores since Paul Revere's, with an estimated 95 million people watching a live stream of the chase. At around 8 p.m., the pursuit ended in the driveway of O.J. Simpson's Brentwood residence. Simpson remained in the Bronco for some time, but by 8:47 he was in police custody. Simpson's chase, arrest, and trial were among the most extensively reported events in U.S. history. The trial, often referred to as the trial of the century due to its worldwide attention, concluded on October 3, 1995, after 11 months with a judgment of not guilty for the 2 murders. An estimated 100 million people in the United States tuned in to see or hear the judgment announcement. After Simpson's acquittal, no more arrests or convictions were made in connection with the killings. Although Simpson was found not guilty of the 2 murders, the evidence against him being the perpetrator is staggering. The prosecution produced significant DNA evidence in Simpson's case, including matching bloody footprints, hair follicles, and a glove recovered near Simpson's residence with blood that tested positive as Goldman's. In Simpson's Ford Bronco, blood was discovered near the driver's outside door handle. Other blood samples were found on the dashboard, door, steering wheel, and carpeting inside the vehicle. DNA analysis revealed that a sample of the blood had a combination of Simpson's and the victim's genetic markers. The first alibi given for O.J. Simpson was that he slept throughout the murders. Later, his defense provided a number of new alibi claims, including one in which he was hitting golf balls outside his house. Simpson's defense also said that the housekeeper of a neighbor, Rosa Lopez, spotted his automobile parked outside the residence. However, Lopez eventually admitted under cross-examination that she was uncertain as to whether his Bronco was there. There is no better way to announce "I'm guilty" than to produce a book outlining how you would theoretically commit the crime, and all for financial gain. Simpson said in the book, "If I had actually done it, I would have brought my good gloves that day. I would have thought, and I would have needed them because I was going to stab my slut of a wife," hypothetically. In response to Simpson's acquittal on criminal charges, the family of Ron Goldman launched a civil claim against Simpson. On October 23, 1996, The parties gave their opening comments, and on January 16, 1997, they rested their cases. Simpson was found liable for the wrongful death of Goldman, battery against Goldman, and violence against Brown by a civil jury in Santa Monica, California, on February 5, 1997. The court ordered Simpson to pay $33.5 million in damages. In February 1999, Simpson's Heisman Trophy and other items were auctioned off to raise almost $500,000 for the Goldman family. Using Occam's razor principle, O.J. Simpson had the motive, the time, and a long history of domestic abuse against Brown. Simpson reportedly assaulted his wife during sex, threw her out of a moving vehicle, and threatened to decapitate her ex-boyfriends, according to journal entries. The records also indicate instances of verbal abuse, such as Simpson reportedly calling her fat and ordering her to get an abortion throughout her pregnancy. Simpson might have dodged prison for the murder cases, but the public overwhelmingly believes that he is guilty. Using Occam's razor principle asserts this view. Making a Murderer is a Netflix true crime documentary series that recounts the mistaken conviction of Steven Avery, a man from Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, who was sentenced to 18 years for the sexual assault and attempted murder of Penny Bjornstam. Later, he was accused and convicted of murdering Teresa Halbach in 2005. The linked narrative is that of Avery's nephew, Brendan Dassey, who was charged and convicted of being an accessory to the murder of Halbach. The series recounts Avery's arrest and conviction in 1985, his exoneration and release in 2003, the civil suit he filed against Manitowoc County, his 2005 arrest, and his subsequent trial and conviction in 2007 for Halbach's murder. It also depicts Dassey's arrest, prosecution, and conviction, emphasizing the allegations of coercion and attorney incompetence in his trial. Making a Murderer was widely viewed and has sparked significant debate since its broadcast. 2023 seems to be the year that the debate on Avery's conviction gets reignited. Making a Murderer was criticized by the media, government officials, and the general public for allegedly being biased towards Steven Avery, re-victimizing Teresa Halbach and her family, and incriminating law enforcement professionals. Convicting a Murderer, the rebuttal docuseries to Netflix's popular true crime series, has recently found a home on Daily Wire Plus. The 10-part series, which has been in development for 6 years, will premiere in the summer of 2023, with Candace Owens narrating and fronting the project. According to the producers, Convicting a Murderer will include exclusive interviews with subjects not featured on the Netflix series, such as law enforcement officers, family members, and fans turned investigators, as well as unedited sequences and additional evidence. Candace Owens commented on the series by saying, "I have an interest in the media's ability to transform villains into heroes via selective reporting. An argument can be made that Netflix made millions by transforming an irrevocably evil man, Steven Avery, into a sympathetic character. In this video, Bad Things will weigh in on this highly contentious case by showing you where both sides went wrong and what most likely happened to Teresa Halbach. Evidence of Avery's guilt would have been a home run in a perfect world, but due to the bungling of the various law enforcement agencies during the investigation, an ominous cloud of doubt hangs over his complicity in the death of Halbach. The investigators' handling of the case was so inept that conspiracy was allowed to creep in and muddy the waters of the case. The conspiracy aspect is due to Avery's civil suit against Manitowoc County, its former sheriff Thomas Kotsurek, and its former district attorney Dennis Vogel, with Avery seeking $36 million in damages for his unlawful conviction. Avery, his defense team, and countless amateur crime investigators have cited the civil suit as a pretext for framing Avery for the embarrassment caused by his wrongful conviction. Just how bad was the investigation that sowed the seeds of doubt and conspiracy? Very bad. These are just some of the mistakes or contradictions made by law enforcement in the investigation. Dean Strang of Avery's lawyers recalled that one of the investigators involved in discovering DNA under the hood of Halbach's car acknowledged not changing gloves after handling evidence inside her vehicle. The hood latch sample was a swab obtained from Halbach's Toyota RAV4 hood latch. Stephen Avery's DNA was detected on the specimen upon examination. Strang added that Manitowoc County Coroner Deborah Kakach would testify that Calumet County authorities walled her off entirely from the crime scene. According to state law, she should have been allowed to investigate early allegations of potential human remains discovered outside Avery's trailer. Strang also said that the Manitowoc County Executive and the county's chief counsel had urged the coroner not to investigate the case. A forensic anthropologist testified on behalf of the defense that an open fire could not have generated enough heat to burn Halbach's body and obliterate her bones, as claimed. Sherry Culhane was involved in the 1985 rape trial of Avery and erroneously testified that one of Avery's hairs were discovered on the victim's clothing. Avery's attorneys also claim that Culhane delayed the processing of the DNA test that proved Stephen's innocence in the 1985 rape. Culhane testified that Halbach's DNA was on the bullet, but she tainted her control sample and used the entire sample, leaving nothing for the defense to analyze. William Newhouse, a Wisconsin State Crime Lab firearms expert, said that he could not connect the bullet discovered in a crevice in Avery's garage to the .22 caliber rifle seized from his bedroom. He could only affirm that it was unquestionably a .22 caliber bullet. There was no DNA on the gun, no blood blowback from shooting someone at such close range, and no blood mist or splatter in the garage. Strang stated that there were small traces of deer blood all over Avery's garage, refuting the hypothesis that they could have scrubbed all the blood evidence out of the garage, as there would not have been any deer blood if they had done so. These are just some of the blunders made by the blundering investigators. Questioning the investigators' ethics and procedures would not stop there. The interrogation of Brendan Dassey would put another black stain on their methods. Brendan Dassey was only 16 years old when he confessed to helping his uncle in the rape, murder and dismemberment of Halbach. But was this confession coerced or coached by the interrogators? Brendan Dassey was born in Manitowoc County on October 19, 1989, to Barbara and Peter Dassey. Brendan and his family lived in a trailer on the 40-acre property of Avery Salvage. In the autumn of 2005, 16-year-old Dassey was a sophomore at Mishicot High School. Despite Dassey's intense desire to attend class, he failed academically. Dassey was enrolled in special education courses and was failing 3 of them. In 1996, he began receiving special education services after cognitive testing revealed that he had a full-scale IQ of 74, a verbal IQ of 65, and a performance IQ of 87.25. In 2002, the Mishicot School District school psychologist Chris Schonenberger Gross assessed Dassey's cognitive abilities and placed him in the borderline to below average range. She indicated that he has been diagnosed with a speech and language impairment and has difficulty articulating himself, as well as understanding some facets of language. It is against that backdrop that Brendan was first questioned by law enforcement on November 6, 2005. On November 6, 2005, law enforcement was already in the control of Avery Salvage as they began their second day of scouring the expansive property. Around 11:55 a.m., detectives from Marinette County saw 2 young men driving Stephen Avery's car and stopped them. After identifying the car's occupants as Brian and Brendan Dassey, nephews of Stephen, the detectives seized the vehicle and asked to speak to the brothers separately. This roadside conversation marked the beginning of Brendan's lengthy interrogation history, an ordeal that would imprison him for the rest of his life. Making a Murderer examines only the March 1st confession. It neither addresses nor even mentions any other interrogations of Dassey. Dassey's interactions with law enforcement during these earlier interrogations were crucial to his March 1st confession. Detectives Anthony J. O'Neill and Todd Baldwin began questioning Dassey in their squad car. O'Neill and Baldwin took turns interrogating Dassey for approximately 45 minutes. During the first 20 minutes of their interaction with Dassey, the detectives were formal but non-confrontational. Dassey's narrative was straightforward. He claims he never saw Hallback on the afternoon of October 31st, the day she visited Avery when he was dropped off at home by the school bus. At approximately 20 minutes into the interrogation, however, O'Neill abruptly transforms the interview into an interrogation. Baldwin: "Yeah, you remember that girl taking that picture. You're getting off the bus. It's a beautiful day. It's daylight and everybody sees her. You do too. Do you remember seeing that girl standing there taking a picture?" Dassey: "Maybe. I don't know. Don't remember." Baldwin: "Brendan, come on." O'Neill: "You do know, don't you, Brendan? You're not going to disappoint any of us. Think about that girl. Was that girl standing there taking a picture that day?" Dassey: "Maybe." O'Neill: It's either a yes or no. I mean, I'm not putting nothing in your mind. You tell me if you remember that girl standing there taking pictures." Dassey: "No reply." O'Neill: "Was she? Huh? Why won't you tell me?" Dassey: "I was just trying to think if I saw her." O'Neill: "Well, did you see her standing there taking a picture?" Dassey: "Yeah." O'Neill: "Why didn't you tell me that? You scared?" Dassey: "No reply." O'Neill: "Huh?" Dassey: "Yeah." O'Neill's statement, "I mean, I'm not putting nothing in your mind," is ironic as this is precisely what he and later interrogators would do. This is especially evident in the February 27, 2006 schoolhouse interrogation. Dassey's first official interrogation is very different from the one in the series. Jim Clemente, an American author, former New York State prosecutor, former FBI profiler, podcast co-host and creator of the show Real Crime Profile, and writer-producer on CBS's Criminal Minds, believes that this interrogation and Dassey's account in it is possibly the most accurate confession as to Dassey's involvement in the murder. On Monday, February 27, 2006, Detective Weigart and Tom Fassbender, a special agent with the Special Assignments Bureau of the Department of Justice Division of Criminal Investigation, hauled Dassey out of class at Mishicot High School to interrogate him. The interrogation occurred in a school conference room without an attorney or guardian. The following is a brief synopsis of the first interview with Dassey written by Weigart. Brendan stated that on Halloween 10/31/05, he had gotten off the bus at 3:45 p.m. and had seen her Jeep down at Stephen's house. Brendan stated that he had gone into his house and played PlayStation for 2 or 3 hours. Brendan stated he then ate, and at approximately 8 p.m. he received a phone call from Stephen. Stephen had asked Brendan if he wanted to come over and have a fire, and Brendan stated he did. Brendan stated Stephen told him to bring the golf cart, which he stated he did. According to Brendan, they went driving around the yard to pick up several items. Brendan stated they dropped off the car seat by the fire and then went to get some wood and an old cabinet and then went back to the fire to throw the seat on the fire. Brendan stated they then waited for the fire to go down and threw wood and an old cabinet on the fire. Brendan stated at that time he saw the toes before they put the wood and the cabinet on the fire. Brendan states Stephen saw him and that Stephen realized he had seen the toes, and Stephen told Brendan not to say anything. According to Brendan, Stephen told him that he, meaning Stephen, had stabbed her, meaning Teresa, in the stomach in the pit, and that he took the knife and put it under the seat of her Jeep. We asked Brendan why Stephen had done this, to which Brendan stated Stephen had said that he was angry. Brendan also told us that Stephen told him that Stephen had used a rope to tie her up in the Jeep. Brendan stated that Stephen had threatened him. Brendan also told us that he saw the fingers, the belly and the forehead of Teresa in the fire. Brendan stated he believed that the body was all together and was underneath some tires and branches. Stephen had told Brendan that he hid the vehicle in the pit back in the tree area and put some tree branches on the top of it and put the car hood on the top of it. Brendan also told us that Stephen had gone into the garage and had taken some clothes and put them in the fire. Brendan described the clothes as a blue shirt and some pants. Brendan stated there was blood on the shirt and there was a hole in the stomach area. Brendan stated Stephen had told Brendan that it was Teresa's shirt. Brendan stated to us that when they were up north at the cabin, Stephen told Brendan that he was going to get a car and try to get it as far away as he could. At no point during this first interrogation did Dassey admit to being involved in the murder. When asked if he had helped kill Holbach, Dassey was more responsive than any other time during the interrogation. Weigert: I have to ask you another difficult question. It's very important that you be honest with me, okay? Did you have anything to do with the death of Teresa Holbach? Brendan: No. Weigert: Tell me who did. Brendan: Steve. Weigert: And Stephen did it by how again? Tell me that again. Brendan: That he stabbed her. Fassbender: Okay. Had he told you that, yes or no? Brendan: Yes. Fassbender: Did he say he had had a gun with her at all? Weigert: Did you ask him about a gun? Weigert: And he told you that he did this in her truck? Brendan: Yeah. Weigert: And he tied her up first? Brendan: Yes. Weigert: Yes? Brendan: Yes. Dassey's later confessions are believed to have been coerced, and Dassey had been clinically evaluated as being highly suggestible, which makes him a suspect more compliant and can ultimately lead to improper interrogation outcomes, such as false confessions. At most, Brendan Dassey is an accessory to the mutilation of a corpse and obstruction of justice in the murder of Holbach. Owen's statement, transforming an irrevocably evil man, Steven Avery, into a sympathetic character, may be precisely what the Making a Murder series did by looking at the evidence with biased tunnel vision. With Avery behind bars and unlikely to be released anytime soon, accusations against him have surfaced that do not put him in a good light, but paint a picture of a violent, abusive sex offender capable of murder. Although these accusations don't prove he killed Holbach, they show his lack of empathy and deep-seated hate of women. Here are just some instances where Avery's character can be determined. In March 1981, at the age of 18, Avery was convicted of burglarizing a bar with a friend. He was released on probation and ordered to pay restitution after serving 10 months of a 2-year sentence in the Manitowoc County Jail. On July 24, 1982, approximately 3 weeks after turning 20, Avery wed single mother Laurie Matheson. They had 4 children as a couple, and Laurie's son, Jason Matheson, stated that the relationship was hostile and abusive. Matheson was repeatedly assaulted with punches, hits, and strangulation. Matheson believes that her son Jason was also a victim of Avery's physical violence. In one instance, Jason and Avery spent time working on cars together. Jason returned with 2 missing teeth. According to Avery, this was caused by an accident. Matheson believes Avery punched Jason after Jason outsmarted Avery. Avery acknowledged in the 1990s that he had abused Matheson. A few months after his release in 1982, when he was 20 years old, 2 men confessed that, at Avery's suggestion, they threw his cat in a bonfire and then watched it burn until it died, after Avery poured gasoline and oil on it. Avery was convicted of animal abuse and sentenced to prison until August 1983. Avery purportedly raped his babysitter Jean in 1982 or 1983. Avery approached Jean as she relaxed on a couch and began to touch her. Avery placed his hand over Jean's mouth and warned her, "If you yell or scream, there will be trouble." Jean told family members about the incident, but did not report it to the police. Jean gave the prosecution witness testimony regarding the Holbach homicide and said she would provide evidence against Avery at trial. On January 3, 1985, Avery drove his cousin's vehicle off the road. Avery aimed a loaded gun at her after she pulled over. Avery was furious that she had spread false allegations about him masturbating on the front lawn, which, according to him, was not the case. Avery insisted that the firearm was not loaded and that he only tried to prevent her from spreading lies about him. He was given a 6-year sentence for endangering safety while displaying a depraved mind and gun possession. Avery sent numerous letters to his wife Lori between 1985 and 1993, while unjustly incarcerated for the rape and attempted murder of Penny Beardson. Several of these letters contained death threats. Avery wrote in large letters in a single letter, "I will get you when I'm out." In a second written note, he refers to Matheson as his honey before threatening to kill her multiple times. Avery penned in the letter, "I will kill you, ha ha ha, and I'll use the letters and pictures against you." During the same time period, one of Stephen's letters was addressed to his children. In the letter, he threatened to murder their mother. Avery was released from prison on September 11, 2003, after DNA evidence cleared him of sexually assaulting Beardson. He then met Jody Stokowski, who stayed in a trailer on Avery's auto salvage property next to Stephen's sister Barb's house. Avery and Stokowski started dating and eventually became engaged. Stokowski appears in the documentary as one of Avery's most ardent supporters. But she later claimed that she lied in the footage and that Avery coerced her into defending him. "He told me how to act," she said. "I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to get hurt." Stokowski described an instance in which Avery assaulted and strangled her. In September of 2004, she reported that Avery pushed her to the ground, struck her and threatened to murder her, according to police records. She then said that he strangled her until she lost consciousness. She told police that Avery was dragging her to his car when she awoke. A police officer eventually stopped them, and Avery was hauled into custody. Additionally, police records document a second incident in which Stokowski claimed Avery verbally threatened her while serving a sentence for drunken driving while she was on work release privilege. Stokowski said she is speaking out because she wants people to know the truth. "He is not innocent," she declared. "He would constantly beat me, punch me, and throw me against a wall." Stokowski would say, "He's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde." Tammy, a friend of Stokowski, saw Stephen grasping the breasts of two 13 or 14-year-old neighbor girls during the summer of 2004. Stephen said to Tammy, "If you need a piece, you need a piece." During the summer of 2004, Avery allegedly sexually assaulted Marie, a teenage relative. Marie claimed that Stephen once placed his hands over her mouth and had sexual relations with her. Avery threatened to murder her and harm her family if she spoke out about the incident. While Avery denied he had assaulted Marie, he admitted they had consensual intercourse. This wouldn't be the only family member that accused him of sexually assaulting them. This may surprise many, but Brendan Dassey accused Avery of molesting him and his brothers. Brendan told his mother in a recorded prison phone conversation not entirely included in the documentary series that he had helped Avery, that Stephen had forced him to do it, and that Stephen had previously inappropriately touched him and others. Part of the conversation goes as follows. "Mom, did he make you do this?" Brendan, "Yeah." "Mom, then why didn't you tell him that?" Brendan, "Tell him what?" "Mom, that Stephen made you do it. You know he made you do a lot of things." Brendan, "Yeah, I told them that. I even told them about Stephen touching me and that." "Mom, what do you mean touching you?" Brendan, "He would grab me somewhere where I was uncomfortable." Mom, "Brendan, I am your mother." Brendan, "Yeah." "Mom, why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me? Was this all before this happened?" Brendan, "What do you mean?" Mom, "All before this happened. Did he touch you before all this stuff happened to you?" Brendan, "Yeah." "Mom, why didn't you come to me? Because then he would have been gone then, and this wouldn't have happened." Brendan, "Yeah." One of the most chilling allegations about Avery came from a prison inmate. Although this is hearsay and not evidence, if true, it points to intent and some foreshadowing of Avery's future. While in prison on the previous 1985 case, Avery told another inmate of his intent to build a torture chamber so he could rape, torture, and kill young women when he was released. Prosecutor Kratz would tell a news outlet. He even drew a diagram. Another inmate was told by Avery that the way to get rid of a body is to burn it. Heat destroys DNA. Later, Hallback's skeletal remains were discovered in a fire pit on Avery's property. So, what most likely happened in the Making a Murderer case? No matter which side you were on, some evidence in the case screams of Avery's guilt. Avery called Auto Trader to specifically request Hallback the day she died. Auto Trader receptionist Dawn Pliska testified that Avery contacted her on October 31, 2005, to request a photographer who had been out to the property previously. In addition, magazine operations superintendent Angela Schuster testified that Hallback visited the Avery compound 6 times between June and Halloween to take photographs. Pliska was not allowed to testify during the trial about one of Hallback's earlier encounters with Avery. She had stated to me that he had come out in a towel, Pliska said, as the jury was outside the courtroom. I just said, "Really?" And she replied, "Yeah," while laughing and saying, "Ew." The judge refused to allow the jury to hear the testimony because the date was unclear and few details about the alleged encounter were known. The Star 67 calls. According to phone records, on October 31st, Avery made 3 calls to Teresa's mobile phone. The contacts occurred at 2:24 and 2:35. Avery used the Star 67 feature so that Teresa was unaware that he was calling before she arrived. Then at 4:35 p.m., one final call is made without the Star 67 feature. Avery initially believed he could say that she did not show up, which was his initial defense, so he tried to set up the alibi call after she had already been there, hence the 4:35 call. Obviously, she will never respond, so he does not need the Star 67 feature for this final call. Avery used a fake name. To trick Hallback into returning, Avery explicitly requested that same girl who was here last time when he booked the appointment and used his sister's name, Barb Janda, as a contact. The contents of Hallback's purse were found in a barrel close to Avery's property. Kratz stated during an interview that Teresa's phone, camera, and other contents of her purse were found 20 feet from Avery's door, burned in his barrel. 2 people saw him putting that stuff in there. This isn't contested. It was all presented as evidence at the jury trial, and the documentary people don't tell you that. Teresa's tooth, a rivet from her jeans, and more were found in Avery's fire pit. Teresa's tooth identified through dental records, a rivet from the Daisy Fuentes denim she wore that day, and the tools used by Avery to cut up her bones were also discovered in the fire pit. 5 of the 6 rivets of the jeans were recovered behind Stephen's garage, where a fire had occurred. The bone area yielded tooth number 31, one of Teresa's rear teeth on the left side of her jaw. Hallback's bones were intertwined with the tires Avery threw on the fire to burn, as Dassey described. Her bones in the fire pit were intertwined with the steel belts left over from the car tires Avery threw on the fire to burn, as described by Dassey, Kratz would say. DNA on the RAV4. Hallback's RAV4 was discovered hidden away in Avery's family's salvage yard, containing blood stains that were ultimately determined to have originated from Avery through DNA testing. His defense team argued persuasively that the blood could have been tampered with, as it was obtained from a sample the county had in storage that had been tampered with. However, the second location where Avery's DNA was discovered, on the underside of the bonnet of Hallback's vehicle, was never discussed in Making a Murderer. If you believe that Manitowoc County authorities planted blood in Hallback's vehicle and the key to her car in Avery's bedroom, it is not difficult to explain away this evidence. Kratz, however, has asserted publicly that the DNA originated from Avery's perspiration and has emphasized the absurdity of law enforcement using a sweat sample to frame Avery. This also applies to the car key. Sherry Culhane examined the car key after its discovery. Culhane discovered a DNA profile belonging to Avery on the key. She found no other DNA profile on the key. Did Avery commit premeditated murder, or as Jim Clemente has hypothesized, Avery tried to come onto Hallback, she rejected him, and he forced himself upon her, eventually killing her. Was there a massive conspiracy involving multiple law enforcement agencies, colluding and planting evidence at the same time Halbach visited Avery's yard and disappeared? A million questions could be asked about this case, and each would have multiple answers, depending on which way you lean. What is certain is that Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey won't be let free anytime soon, and that convicting a murderer is about to throw gasoline on this already fiery case. In the depths of a chilling mystery, a name echoes through the corridors of uncertainty. Michael Peterson. Whispers of guilt have always casted doubt on the innocence of this controversial figure. Suspicion hangs in the air in every story he has told about the night of his wife's death. Who is Michael Peterson, and what dark secrets does he harbor? Is Michael Peterson guilty? Did he murder his wife and another woman 16 years earlier? This video examines why we think Michael Peterson is guilty and what most likely happened to his wife, Kathleen Peterson, and Elizabeth Ratliff. True crime fans have been obsessed with the Peterson case for over 2 decades. According to Michael Peterson, he discovered his wife Kathleen near death at the bottom of a staircase in their North Carolina home on a December evening in 2001. According to the prosecution, Peterson put her there. Peterson was granted a new trial in which he entered an Alford plea following a lengthy and bizarre first trial where he was sentenced to life. He was found guilty of Kathleen's murder, partly based on blood spatter evidence which was later proven to be flawed. Peterson has always maintained his innocence, and the case has been surrounded by ambiguities and alternative theories that have acquired credence over the years. This is a short chronological timeline of the case's events. November 25, 1985. Elizabeth Ratliff was discovered dead in her home in Grafenhausen, Germany on November 25, 1985. Her nanny found her in the early hours of the morning, lying at the bottom of a blood-splattered staircase. At the time, it was believed that Ratliff died of natural causes. Her intracerebral bleeding was caused by a pre-existing blood disorder known as von Willebrand's disease, as determined by an autopsy. Peterson and his then-wife Patricia lived in the area and were friends with Ratliff. Peterson was the last person known to have seen Ratliff alive, but he was not suspected of misconduct. Peterson adopted Margaret and Martha Ratliff shortly after the death of Ratliff. He and Patricia Peterson already had 2 sons, Todd and Clayton. 1997. Peterson married Kathleen Atwater, an accomplished telecommunications firm Nortel Networks executive, in 1997. Caitlin, Kathleen's daughter, became a part of the integrated family. Peterson and Kathleen's marriage was idyllic, according to those who knew them. December 9, 2001. Peterson called 911 at 2:40 a.m. to report that he had just entered his home and discovered Kathleen unconscious at the bottom of a staircase. He said that his wife, aged 48, had fallen down.
No, 15, 20, I don't know. Please!
Peterson reported that Kathleen was still breathing during this first phone call. Peterson redialed 911 after his first call was disconnected. He said that Kathleen was not breathing this time. When the authorities arrived at the scene later, they discovered Kathleen's body in the location described by Peterson, surrounded by a significant quantity of blood. Peterson said that he and Kathleen had watched a movie that evening and spent several hours drinking wine by the pool. Kathleen had gone to bed before he did, and he discovered her when he went inside. Kathleen must have stumbled and fallen to her death on the stairs while under the influence of alcohol and possibly Valium, according to Peterson. A medical examiner examining her corpse at the scene concurred that her death was likely accidental. This narrative, however, soon began to shift. During the post-mortem examination, the coroner determined that Kathleen's injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma and not an accidental fall. December 20th, 2001. Peterson was indicted for Kathleen's homicide on December 20th, 2001. Shortly after, he surrendered to the police and was taken into custody. "Kathleen was my life," Peterson said at the time in a public statement. "I've whispered her name in my heart 1,000 times. She is there, and I can't stop crying. I would never have done anything to hurt her." Initially, all of Peterson's children defended him and proclaimed his innocence. However, Caitlin, Kathleen's only biological child, quickly distanced herself from the rest of the family and sided with the prosecution. June 2003. Given the similarities between her death and Kathleen's, German authorities reopened Elizabeth Ratliff's case. After 17 years, her body was exhumed and a new post-mortem was conducted. This autopsy report found that Ratliff died of blunt force trauma to the head, most likely due to a deadly attack. German prosecutors in Darmstadt verified that they were collaborating with American authorities. Peterson's trial started on July 1, 2003, in Durham, North Carolina. The prosecution contended that Peterson murdered Kathleen in the family home with a blowpoke, while the defense asserted that Kathleen died in a bizarre accident, specifically that she stumbled on the stairs, struck her head, and then slipped in her blood as she tried to stand up, causing more severe head injuries. The prosecution called for former male escort Brent Volgamot to take the stand during the trial. Peterson paid Volgamot for sex multiple times, corroborating previous allegations that Peterson was bisexual. Peterson asserted that Kathleen was aware of his bisexuality and approved of his extramarital affairs. October 10, 2003. The jury found Peterson guilty of first-degree murder after 4 days of deliberation. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. September 14, 2011. A judge in North Carolina granted Peterson a new trial on September 14, 2011, after one of the prosecution's main witnesses was discovered to be unreliable. Dwayne Deaver, who testified about the blood spatter patterns at the crime scene, was found to have misled both the judge and the jury in the Peterson case. Peterson was released from prison after serving nearly a decade behind bars. He was released on a $300,000 bond, placed under house arrest, and made to wear an ankle monitor. February 24, 2017. Peterson entered an Alford plea to a reduced charge of manslaughter on February 24, 2017. A defendant can maintain their innocence while admitting prosecutors have sufficient evidence to convict them through an Alford plea. Due to his guilty plea, he was sentenced to time already served and was officially freed. One red flag in the Peterson case was the similarities in the deaths of two women close to Michael Peterson. The first was Elizabeth Ratliff in 1985. Elizabeth Ratliff's untimely demise in November 1985 became a flashpoint in Peterson's prosecution for the murder of Kathleen. The Durham medical examiner therefore exhumed Elizabeth Ratliff's body and performed a second post-mortem. The prosecution would later use Elizabeth Ratliff's murder as part of their case against Peterson, causing tensions within Peterson's own family, especially between his adoptive daughters Martha and Margaret Ratliff. Elizabeth Ratliff was discovered dead at the bottom of her staircase on November 25, 1985, ominously similar to Kathleen's death. When Elizabeth Ratliff and her husband George lived in Germany in the 1980s, they were close companions with Peterson and his first wife, Patricia. Patricia and Elizabeth had worked together at a U.S. Air Force Base elementary school. Elizabeth and George had two daughters, Margaret and Martha, whom Peterson adopted after their deaths, along with a sizable life insurance policy. Michael Peterson was the last person believed to have seen her alive the night before, when their families had dinner together at her residence. Like Kathleen, Ratliff was discovered at the bottom of her stairs with head injuries. Her death was investigated at the time by the US military police in Germany, and an autopsy revealed that she died from an intracerebral hemorrhage. In April 2003, a medical examiner from Durham conducted a second autopsy and decided that Ratliff's cause of death was homicide. The medical examiner found that Kathleen Peterson and Elizabeth Ratliff both sustained similar head injuries, including 7 lacerations caused by blunt force trauma. In her report, Dr. Deborah L. Radish concluded that Elizabeth Ratliff's injuries were inconsistent with a fall down a set of stairs. Instead, they show multiple blunt force impacts, either from blows to the head caused by a blunt object, or the head being forcibly struck against a hard surface. It is further my opinion that these injuries were incurred while Mrs. Ratliff was alive and are of sufficient severity to have caused her death. Peterson's life in Germany and possible crime there would resurface as 2 women would give testimony against him. Karen Harm said that she saw Peterson fleeing from Ratliff's house on the night she died. Harm's inability to travel to the Durham court case due to a medical condition prompted Judge Orlando Hudson to enable her to testify via a written statement. Because Harm's statement was written in German, prosecutors withdrew it. According to prosecutor Freda Black, officials could not find a court-certified translator to translate the affidavit into English. Amy Beth Berner, Ratliff's friend, told the lawyers that Peterson's actions did not make sense and that she had always been suspicious of him. Mike Peterson was the person on the scene. Liz had boots on her feet. She never wore boots on her feet when she was at home, she said. Michael had told me he'd been in the CIA at some point and had point-blank murdered someone while he was in Vietnam. That concerned me, she added. Berner also claimed when she had child custody problems, Peterson had an unsettling solution. Michael came to me at that point and he said he had connections and if I wanted to have her knocked off, he could do that, Berner said. The evidence against Michael Peterson in Kathleen's death is more compelling than that of Ratliff's due to the extensive investigation and media scrutiny surrounding the case. These are the 5 reasons we think Michael Peterson killed his wife. Number 5. The bloody footprint. A bloody footprint was discovered on the back of Kathleen's sweatpants, facing the floor when police arrived, contradicting Peterson's account. In addition to blood on Michael's trousers, there was evidence that some of the blood at the crime scene had been cleaned up before the EMTs arrived. Number 4. Peterson tried to stage the scene. When authorities arrived at the Peterson house, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses were precisely arranged on the kitchen counter. Kathleen's fingerprints were not found on either of the glasses. The prosecution claimed that the wine and glassware were Michael's attempt to simulate Kathleen's intoxication before her fall down the stairs. She had been drinking, but the medical examiner determined her blood alcohol level was low enough to pass a breathalyzer test. Number 3. Peterson deleted hundreds of computer files the week of Kathleen's death. Police confiscated Peterson's computer and discovered that he had deleted 216 files the day before Kathleen's death and 352 files 2 days after. The state engaged a specialist to recover some of the lost files. This expert claimed to have discovered deleted emails detailing Peterson's financial problems. In one email, he said that his sons were in debt and struggling. In another, he requested $5,000 for one of his adopted daughter's college tuition from a relative. He also asked that his ex-wife secure a $30,000 home equity loan to help their son with his debt problems. Number 2. Peterson was broke. During his 2003 trial, prosecutors cited financial difficulties as the motive for Kathleen's murder and stated that the couple were in debt. The prosecution said the couple owed $143,000 in credit card debt. To eliminate their debt, the couple had been selling off liquid assets. There was also concern that Nortel would end Kathleen's employment. District Attorney Jim Harden said during the trial, Kathleen's death, accidental death, would have then allowed him to continue to live the affluent, privileged life to which he had been accustomed, even though he had no job. Kathleen had a $1,400,000 life insurance policy. After their marriage in 1997, Kathleen changed her beneficiary from her first husband to Peterson. The money ultimately went to Kathleen's biological daughter and her first husband, not Peterson. Peterson would get some money out of Kathleen's death, though. The company where Kathleen worked, Nortel Networks, paid him $384,000 in death benefits, including deferred compensation, pension plan death benefits, and retirement benefits. He used the funds to pay for his defense team during his trial. If he were never accused of the death of his wife, Peterson would be living just as Hardin had said. Number 1. The timeline doesn't make sense. It is believed that Kathleen Peterson was conscious for at least a part of the 90 to 120 minutes that she bled to death. Why did Peterson not hear her cries for help? Peterson asserts that he was outdoors by the pool where she fell, but was dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, even though the temperature was about 50 degrees. Red neurons were also discovered in Kathleen's brain. Red neurons show that brain tissues were deprived of oxygen. Kathleen must have been dead for at least 2 hours for the red neurons to develop before EMTs arrived on the scene. Kathleen's blood was also dry when police arrived, despite Michael's claim that she was still breathing when he called 911 and had died in his arms. This contradicts Michael's allegation about the length of time he spent alone outside. These are just some of the inconsistencies in the Peterson case. Peterson was a compulsive liar. His stolen valor stories and his leading a double life engaging in affairs with male escorts come to mind. What most likely happened to these two women in the presence of Michael Peterson? Murder. Was Michael Peterson a callous killer? We'll leave you with this little fact and let you decide for yourself. When EMTs arrived at the scene and were trying to revive Kathleen, Peterson sat at his desk checking emails. JonBenét Ramsey. What most likely happened? This video delves into the dark secrets of one of America's most perplexing murder cases. Take a step with us into the shadowy world of the JonBenét Ramsey case, a haunting tale that continues to baffle and captivate the world. We peel back the layers of this enigma, exploring the labyrinth of evidence, theories, and unanswered questions, where innocence was shattered and whispers of conspiracy still linger. As we navigate the twists and turns of this perplexing case, we will show you evidence that an intruder may have killed this innocent child. Brace yourself for a disturbing voyage into the labyrinth of the JonBenét Ramsey case, where each revelation reveals yet another layer of chilling mystery. On December 26, 1996, John and Patsy Ramsey reported that their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét Ramsey, had been kidnapped and that a ransom note demanding $118,000 had been found. A few hours later, she was discovered murdered in her Boulder, Colorado family home. JonBenét Ramsey's shocking murder marked the beginning of a decades-long mystery. In the days, weeks, months, and years that followed, authorities and amateur detectives tried to answer just one question. Who murdered the child beauty queen? Had it been a home intruder? Under the media's constant scrutiny, police considered hundreds of possible suspects as the investigation progressed. They investigated the lives of a housekeeper, neighbors, and even pedophiles in other states. JonBenét Ramsey's murder remains unresolved, despite numerous false confessions and clues. On the surface, JonBenét Ramsey's brief existence appeared extravagant. JonBenét, born on August 6, 1990, to John and Patsy Ramsey, spent most of her time competing in and winning children's beauty pageants. JonBenét had won numerous titles by age 6, including America's Royale Miss, Little Miss Colorado, and National Tiny Miss Beauty. She had also posed for several glamour photographs, which many later considered inappropriate for her age. Aside from the pageant work, JonBenét's life was relatively ordinary. She attended High Peaks Elementary School in Boulder, Colorado, while living with her wealthy parents and older brother Burke. On December 25, 1996, she and her family celebrated Christmas. This would be the little girl's last. According to her parents, everything appeared to be in order when they put their daughter to bed that night. No one, other than the killer or killers, knows precisely what happened between that night and early dawn the next day. The Ramseys realized something was amiss at 5:30 a.m. when Patsy saw a piece of paper adhered to the staircase. What she had discovered was a 2.5-page ransom note. In the note, the author claimed, "We have your daughter," demanded $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return, and vowed to call with more details by 10 a.m. tomorrow. "I just recall reading, 'We have your daughter,'" Patsy Ramsey would say later. "I just felt an overwhelming anxiety, and I just dashed back up those stairs as fast as I could and pushed her door open." Patsy said that because JonBenét was not in her room, she awoke her husband and dialed 911. "We have a kidnapping," she cried on the phone. "Hurry, please. There's a note left and our daughter's gone." Although police, family, and acquaintances searched the residence, no trace of the girl was found. Most officers left after a few hours, leaving Linda Arndt, a detective, to wait with JonBenét's parents. Arndt, who found it peculiar that neither parent reacted when the hijackers did not contact them by 10 a.m., suggested that John Ramsey conduct a second search of the residence. She told him that he might be able to notice if anything seemed out of place. John then went down to the basement, which the police had not yet searched. John discovered JonBenét's body there. She had been savagely beaten over the head, strangled with a nylon cord, and one of her mother's paintbrushes, and possibly violated. "I knew instantly what I found. I found my daughter," John Ramsey later said. "She was lying on a white blanket. The blanket was wrapped around her. Her hands were tied above her head. She had tape over her mouth." After the gruesome discovery, the Boulder Police Department made numerous mistakes that compromised the investigation, including allowing JonBenét's father to move the body and not conducting separate interviews with the parents. Even before the body was discovered, the police allowed multiple visitors into the residence, contaminating the crime scene. Some visitors had even cleaned the house, possibly removing any traces that had been left of the possible murderer. It is believed that the failure of the police to adequately secure the entire crime scene is one of the primary reasons why the case has been so challenging to solve. A subsequent post-mortem depicted a dismal picture of JonBenét's death. The 6-year-old's cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation with associated craniocerebral trauma. In other words, she had been severely struck in the head and strangled. It did not take long for John and Patsy Ramsey to become suspects. Considering that JonBenét's body was discovered in her family residence, it is probable that a close relative was responsible for her death. Her mother and father were also suspiciously quick in securing legal representation. Early investigations did indeed appear to circle back to the Ramsey residence. The garroted rope used to kill JonBenét, one of Patsy's paintbrushes, was used to create it. The type of paper that was used for the ransom note, it had been removed from an existing notepad in the residence. The pen used, also present in the home. Even the contents of the ransom note appeared questionable. First, it was extremely long, while ransom notes are typically brief. In addition, the author wanted an exact sum of money, $118,000. That was the precise quantity of bonus money John Ramsey received that year. The police quickly began to view John and Patsy Ramsey as their leading suspects. The theory was that they accidentally murdered JonBenét and then staged the crime scene to make it appear as though she was murdered by an intruder. Meanwhile, JonBenét's parents denied the allegations vehemently. However, as the investigation dragged on, some detectives began to examine alternative options. Initially, Lou Smith, a retired Colorado detective, called out of retirement to help with the investigation, suspected the parents. However, the more he investigated, the more he questioned their culpability. Instead, Smith believed that the intruder had entered through one of the home's many open windows, specifically the basement window. Using evidence such as an unfamiliar shoe impression near the crime scene and a potential stun gun imprint on JonBenét's body, he argued that this unknown individual was the murderer of JonBenét Ramsey. However, most Boulder police officers prioritized JonBenét's parents as suspects. Smith eventually quit the case out of frustration. "I cannot in good conscience be a part of the persecution of innocent people," Smith stated. "It would be highly improper and unethical for me to stay when I so strongly believe this." But perhaps the most startling theory is that Burke, JonBenét's brother, who was only 9 years old at the time, was guilty of JonBenét's murder. This theory gathered momentum following the 2016 CBS documentary series, The Case of JonBenét Ramsey. According to the documentary, JonBenét's intestines contained undigested pineapple, and a tray of pineapple was discovered in the kitchen. However, Patsy denied having prepared pineapple for JonBenét. Burke prepared the pineapple as a midnight snack, according to the controversial theory. However, when JonBenét took a piece, Burke allegedly struck her on the head with an object, possibly a flashlight. Assuming JonBenét was dead, their parents orchestrated her murder scene. In response to the series, Burke Ramsey sued CBS for $750 million, but the case was resolved out of court. If the parents or her brother did not murder JonBenét Ramsey, then who did? Unless the family murderer theory can be conclusively proved, the most likely theory is that of a home intruder. See if you agree with our supporting evidence that an intruder killed JonBenét, and leave us a comment in the comment section below. Watch till the end when one of the world's most famous profilers weighs in on the case. Reason 1. The existence of evidence that JonBenét had been sexually violated is one of the most substantial clues that this was an intruder crime, as it is uncommon for a husband and wife to conspire to cover up abuse committed by only one of them. This evidence is equivocal, and it is unclear whether or not she has ever been sexually abused. There was no evidence of sperm, and the official conclusion is that sexual assault cannot be ruled out. Reason 2. If the parents were compelled to murder their daughter to cover up their son's attack, garroting would not be the method of choice. It is too slow, intimate, and inhumane. Reason 3. The bloodstain on JonBenét's undergarments contained DNA from 2 individuals who were not in the Ramsey family. Reason 4. Police discovered an unlocked door in the Ramsey residence. 2 basement windows were also left open, so Christmas light cables could be brought in from outside. An additional basement window was broken before the murder of JonBenét, which would have allowed entry into the Ramsey residence. Access to this window has since been debunked. Reason 5. In the months preceding the murder, there were over 100 burglaries in the Ramseys' neighborhood, and a staggering 38 registered sex offenders living within a 2-mile radius of the Ramseys' home. Due to JonBenét's greater visibility as a contestant in a child beauty pageant, some believe she was more susceptible to pedophilic abduction by a stranger. Reason 6. There were no traces of blood discovered in the Ramsey residence. This shows that JonBenét was likely already deceased or close to death when the head trauma was administered. This disproves the notion that strangulation was used as a cover-up after Burke lashed out and mortally struck his sister in the head. The first of the 2 methods used was strangulation. Reason 7. The mind hunter himself, John Douglas, consulted with the Ramsey family and wrote that he is convinced they are blameless. There are few individuals in the true crime sphere whose opinion carries as much weight as Douglas's. John Douglas's theory about what happened to JonBenet, based on decades of profiling, goes as follows. JonBenet Ramsey's killer was a white male, relatively young, who had a personal grudge against John Ramsey and intended to carry it out by defiling and robbing him of the most valuable thing in the world to him. He entered the house while the family was out, either through the basement or with one of the many unaccounted-for keys to the Ramsey home, carrying with him a stun gun, a roll of duct tape, and a spool of cord. His intention was to incapacitate her, abduct her, and molest her. The ransom demand was an afterthought and could explain why it was written on materials found in the home. He had no intention on collecting such a low sum. He was just trying to make a point, and possibly cast suspicion on the Ramseys. It's also possible he had already written a shorter and more succinct ransom note, but that given the amount of time he had to himself, wrote a longer one. He went up to JonBenet's room, incapacitated her with an air taser stun gun, which would not have made much noise, taped her mouth shut, and then took her downstairs. He began strangling her either during or right after the molestation, and whether he meant to or not, caused her death. When he realized what he had done, he finished the job with a quick blow to the head, and instead of taking her, he fled the house in a panic. Who are the known suspects if Douglas's and others' assertions are right about a home intruder? Gary Oliver. Gary Oliver, 32, was a known sexual offender living in Boulder, Colorado, when JonBenet was discovered strangled to death in what appeared to be a possible sexual assault. In 2000, when he was arrested on narcotics charges, police allegedly discovered a magazine cutout of JonBenet Ramsey in his backpack. He was released, but suspicions persisted. Ollie Gray, a private investigator for the Ramsey family, once referred to Oliver's connections to JonBenet as a bombshell arrest and criticized the Boulder PD for not considering him a more credible suspect. Soon after, Oliver's high school friend Michael Vale supported Gray's suspicion with an allegation. Vale alleged that shortly after the murder, a distraught Oliver called his long-standing friend and confessed that he had hurt a little girl. "I hurt a little girl." Vale also told a magazine reporter that he was disturbed by the similarity between the knots used to construct the garrote that strangled JonBenet and those used in an incident where Oliver tried to strangle his mother with a telephone cord. Oliver was also rumored to have ties to a theory that connects the markings discovered on JonBenet's body to a stun gun encounter. At the time of his initial arrest, Oliver had a stun gun in his possession. While he was exonerated by DNA testing for the murder of JonBenet, he was later charged with 2 counts of child sexual exploitation for possessing child pornography. Michael Helgoth. According to Ollie Gray, another possible suspect was an electrician named Michael Helgoth, who worked at a nearby auto salvage yard. Gray referred to Helgoth as a hellraiser, involved with a purported Ramsey family property dispute. Could this have been a potential motive for seeking vengeance against the family and kidnapping JonBenet, as John Douglas alluded to in his profile? It has been theorized that when 26-year-old Helgoth learned that he could be a suspect in the case, and officials discovered a boot print that resembled his near the Ramsey residence, he committed before authorities could reach him. His death occurred 2 days after the Boulder DA announced a new suspect at a press conference in 1997. Helgoth has apparently been exonerated by inconclusive DNA evidence. John Mark Kerr. In 2006, a former school teacher named John Mark Kerr confessed in graphic, explicit detail to strangling JonBenet in 1996. After facing child pornography allegations in the US, Kerr was apprehended in Thailand, where he was living as a fugitive. The now 58-year-old initially inserted himself into the case by emailing Michael Tracy, a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, who was producing a documentary on the case. Once the emails took a disquieting turn, exposing the adult man's sexual fixation with JonBenét, Tracy reported care to the Bangkok police, who detained him as a potential suspect. His DNA did not match the profile of an unknown male discovered on the waistline of JonBenét's long johns, and he was ultimately cleared after being transported to Boulder for questioning. Kerr's delusional confession included several diary entries purportedly penned at the crime scene. In one dramatic account, Kerr recalls strangling JonBenét during a failed love game. Kerr's alleged involvement made international headlines, and his insistence that he murdered her was sufficient enough to spark a media frenzy. However, he was ultimately disregarded as a suspect and dismissed as a pedophile seeking notoriety and fame. According to a report, the former suspect lives in the Pacific Northwest under a new name and gender. Despite all the confessions, clues, and conspiracy theories, authorities are no closer to solving this case in 2023 than in 1996. Decades after the murder, the question remains: who murdered JonBenét Ramsey? Time will tell if we ever receive a definitive answer. For now, the complete truth about JonBenét Ramsey's death tragically died with her. Who the Zodiac most likely is? It's a question that has been asked since 1968. Who was the notorious Zodiac killer? This mysterious figure terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area from the late 1960s to the early 1970s, leaving behind a string of unsolved murders and a series of cryptic letters and codes, some of which remain unsolved to this day. This video will explore the Zodiac killer's crimes, history, and the theories surrounding his identity. So join us as we closely examine one of America's most notorious cold cases. The Zodiac Killer is one of the most notorious serial killers in American history and is believed to have murdered at least 5 people in Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s, causing fear and anxiety in the state to when and who the next victims would be. The Zodiac has become a source of fascination for true crime enthusiasts and amateur sleuths who still try to crack the case. Although he was never caught, the Zodiac Killer's story has been immortalized in many books, films, and television shows. Stay tuned for our take on the most likely suspects and why. The Zodiac mystery starts 5 days before Christmas in 1968. December 20th, 1968. David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were murdered with a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol in a gravel parking area near Lake Herman Road in Vallejo. July 4th, 1969. Darlene Ferrin, 22, and Mike Magoo, 19, were shot multiple times with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol on July 4th, 1969, while parked in Vallejo's Blue Rock Springs Park. Ferrin is killed, but Magoo survives to describe their attacker. The same evening, an individual contacted the Vallejo Police Department to identify the murder weapon and take responsibility for the homicide and the Faraday-Jensen homicides on Lake Herman Road. July 31st, 1969. The San Francisco Examiner, Chronicle, and Vallejo Times-Herald receive correspondence from an individual professing to be the killer. Each letter contains 1/3 of the cipher of the encoded message. The letters are signed with a symbol of 2 intersecting circles. The logo is also used on watches manufactured by Zodiac. August 4th, 1969. In a letter to the San Francisco Examiner dated August 4th, 1969, the killer first employs the famous greeting, "This is the Zodiac speaking," coining the moniker he would be known as forever. August 8, 1969. Donald and Betty Harden decipher the cipher codes and produce a statement from the Zodiac describing his enjoyment of murdering people. September 27, 1969. Cecilia Shepard, 22, and Brian Hartnell, 20, are approached by a man in a Zodiac-emblazoned hooded costume on the shoreline of Lake Berryessa in Napa, California. Both are repeatedly stabbed, but Hartnell survives. The symbol and the message, Vallejo 12-20-68, 7-4-69, Sept 27-69, 6:30 by knife, is carved on Hartnell's car door, confirming the previous homicides by the Zodiac. October 11, 1969. Paul Stine, 29, was shot and murdered just before 10 p.m. at the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets in San Francisco. Officers may have seen the killer, but they did not suspect it was him because the dispatcher had mistakenly instructed them to search for a black attacker. October 13, 1969. The Chronicle receives a letter and a piece of Stine's bloodied clothing from the Zodiac. November 8, 1969. A fourth cipher of 340 symbols is sent to the Chronicle. People sometimes seek simple explanations when confronted with complex, coincidental, or puzzling occurrences. The Zodiac cold case has not escaped this phenomenon of crazy conspiracy theories. The most well-known and most ridiculous is, of course, that the politician Ted Cruz is the Zodiac. Many other theories have been put forward, some very far-fetched, while others might be credible. One such theory proposes that two people were involved in the Zodiac crimes: the killer and the letter writer. These two people could have worked together or independently. Someone with the knowledge of a San Francisco Bay police officer could have written the macabre letters the Zodiac murderer sent to newspapers. One member in an online thread elaborates on this theory. It seems to me that the letter writer could not have even known the killer in the shootings of the teenagers and Paul Stine. If the writer had been a cop, he would have been able to accurately describe the crime scenes. He likely also could have ripped off part of Stine's shirt after the body had been taken away. That means he would have to be an SFPD officer, but he could have gotten crime scene descriptions from Vallejo too. Maybe the killer could have even been Arthur Lee Allen. Serial killers often work in pairs. What I find most compelling about this theory is how advantageous it would be for the killers. If the killer was caught, he would be cleared based on the evidence from the letters, since it would be assumed that they were the same person. Did racial prejudice contribute to the police's failure to apprehend the Zodiac killer? Possibly. Two police officers had been conducting patrols in the vicinity where taxi driver Paul Stine was murdered. Despite all evidence and investigations suggesting that the Zodiac was Caucasian, these two police officers were unaware of this fact. An explanation was put forward by authorities. When police radioed in to keep an eye out for the suspect, there was a terrible mistake in the communication, which had police seeking a colored man instead of a Caucasian one. Two police who were patrolling the area happened to come across a man who they observed walking away from the crime scene, but they didn't stop him as he didn't fit the description. Could there be a Manson-Zodiac connection? After committing a string of gruesome murders in Southern California, Charles Manson and his family of killers rose to infamy and became household names. Charles Manson and other family members spent time in the San Francisco Bay Area, leading some to hypothesize a connection between the Manson family and the Zodiac homicides. Howard Davis, a staunch advocate of the Zodiac-Manson conspiracy theory, claimed that a relative of one Manson victim had engaged private investigators who unearthed evidence implicating the Manson family in the Zodiac murders. Davis also claimed that a reliable source within the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office disclosed that the initial investigation into the Manson murders had unearthed evidence linking Manson to Zodiac, including the hooded costume worn by Zodiac during the Lake Berryessa stabbing. According to Davis's source, authorities in Southern California allegedly conspired to conceal this crucial evidence. The so-called Zodiac-Manson connection continues to be a popular theory on many websites. Still, the evidence does not indicate that Charles Manson and his followers were involved in the Zodiac crimes. Everyone who has studied the case has their own theory on who the infamous killer could be. Some authors have made a profession out of their obsession with the subject. And there is no shortage of suspects, each with their own merit. We will look at some of the most compelling of the hundreds of suspects and give our opinion on who we think is the most likely Zodiac killer. Lawrence Kane. Faisal Zahraoui, a French-Moroccan researcher and polytechnician, claims to have deciphered the last two cryptograms sent by the Zodiac, Z32 and Z13. The result points to 2010 deceased Zodiac suspect Lawrence Kane, also known as K. Who is Kane, though? Born Lawrence Klein in New York in April 1924 to parents Morris H. Klein and Sarah Benjamin, he grew up as an only child. Kane enlisted in the United States Navy during the Second World War and was honorably discharged from active duty in 1943. Nonetheless, he would subsequently use multiple aliases to conceal his identity. During the 1960s, he was detained numerous times on offences including larceny, theft, and prowling. His name has been spelled Larry Kane, Lawrence Klein, Lawrence K., Lawrence Kane, and Larry Kane, among others. When the Zodiac was active, Kane was in his mid-40s, stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, and weighed 160 pounds, all characteristics attributed to that of the Zodiac. Kane was a prime suspect in the investigations of police officer Harvey Hines, and his penchant for adopting aliases was a focal point of those investigations. Hines compiled a psychological profile on Kane, and it describes him as a loner, con artist, deceitful, and indifferent to women. Kathleen Jones identified him in 1993 as the person who kidnapped her and her infant in 1970 in a suspected Zodiac case. He was also said to have been residing near Paul Stein's murder. In September 1962, Lawrence Kane was involved in a head-on collision with a cement truck that left him with severe cranial injuries. He was the only passenger in his vehicle when it collided with the lorry on a freeway in the San Mateo area, and he underwent multiple surgeries for his injuries. These head injuries may have caused damage, as seen in many serial killers' brains, that have been linked to their antisocial behavior. A psychological evaluation revealed on page 2 of Detective Hines' profile 3 years later said that Kane was losing control of self-gratification. Although the San Francisco Police Department has acknowledged receiving Faisal Zahraoui's work on the ciphers, it does not validate the research's veracity. Kane passed away on May 20, 2010 in Nevada at 86. He was residing under the name Lawrence Kane at the time. Ross Sullivan. Several factors explain why some people believe Ross Sullivan to be the Zodiac killer. 1966's murder of Sherry Jo Bates, whom some believe was a potential Zodiac victim, is the most compelling. On Halloween night, Bates's body was discovered on the campus of Riverside City College, where she had just begun her freshman year. Sullivan was one of the initial suspects in the murder of Bates. Several of his colleagues at the campus library, near where the body was discovered, recalled that he made them feel uncomfortable. He even disappeared briefly after Bates's death. Although Bates is not designated an official Zodiac victim, her murder is remarkably similar to those committed by the Zodiac. After Bates's death, local newspapers received letters detailing information only her killer would know. These killers resembled the Zodiac killer's letters, including word usage and misspellings. Moreover, Sullivan's probable proximity to Bates is not the only reason some believe he is a credible Zodiac killer suspect. Sullivan studied cryptology, donned army boots similar to those found at a Zodiac crime site, and bore a striking resemblance to the Zodiac due to his thick glasses. Very few personal details about him are available. College personnel were at the time concerned about Sullivan's behavior, but police claimed he had an alibi for the evening Bates was murdered. Sullivan was intermittently institutionalized for mental illness and died in Santa Cruz in 1977. Richard Gaikowski. Richard Gaikowski, born in South Dakota, was a newspaper columnist and filmmaker who became associated with the Zodiac case due to some bizarre clues. An informant who went by the alias Goldcatcher to protect his identity brought Richard Gaikowski to the attention of Zodiac investigators. He claimed to have worked with Gaikowski at a Bay Area newspaper in the 1980s and secretly recorded approximately 10 hours of Gaikowski's conversations. Ultimately, he became convinced that Gaikowski was the Zodiac killer. According to Goldcatcher, Richard Gaikowski appeared to have excessive knowledge of the Bay Area homicides. Richard Gaikowski was involved in the operation of the underground counterculture Good Times newspaper at the same time as the infamous Zodiac murders. The Good Times operated near the home of Zodiac victim Paul Stine, who resided at 1850 Fell Street, San Francisco. The Good Times newspaper collective was located at 2377 Bush Street, roughly 1.34 miles from the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets, and the presumed area where Paul Stine picked up the Zodiac on his final journey on October 11, 1969. The Good Times was also close to the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets, where Paul Stine's body was eventually discovered. Richard Gaikowski's military training as a medic is intriguing on two fronts. He would have had access to the military-style Wing Walker boot impressions found leading to and from the crime scene in the Zodiac killer's third attack at Lake Berryessa on September 27, 1969, and the brutal murder of taxicab driver Paul Stine in Presidio Heights on October 11, 1969, where the killer allegedly tore off a neat rectangular piece of the victim's shirt by hand. This was a common technique taught to medical personnel in the field, particularly during wartime when bandages and tourniquets were in short supply, a technique unfamiliar to the general public. It has also been suggested that Richard Gaikowski attended the funeral of Paul Stine. Gaikowski also shortened his surname to Gaik and Gaik, providing a source for the 4 letters discovered in the cipher mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle on July 31, 1969, albeit with the letter Y added to form Gaik. In later years, Nancy Slover stated that Richard Gaikowski's voice most closely resembled the voice she recalled from a payphone call on July 5, 1969. She was the police dispatcher who received the killer's call at 12:40 a.m., approximately 40 minutes after the Blue Rock Springs Park attack on July 4, 1969. Even though many years had passed before she finally heard Richard Gaikowski's voice recording, she contended that she had good reason not to forget it, because the Zodiac's voice was permanently imprinted in her mind from that traumatic payphone call. She stated in a documentary, "It's the same guy." In 2004, aged 68, Richard Gaikowski died of lung cancer at the San Francisco Veterans Administration Center. Even though this suspect has been linked to the Zodiac, homicides by the anonymous Goldcatcher, and certain Zodiac researchers, there is not enough evidence to warrant further investigation. Although this video is not a top 10 video, some suspects tick most boxes regarding their potential of being the notorious killer. Our top 3 tick more boxes than most of the hundreds of suspects, and number 3 is a relatively recent addition to the list. Paul Alfred Dorr. Paul Alfred Dorr, proposed as a suspect by Jarrett Kobek in his 2022 book How to Find Zodiac, is one of the most recent Zodiac suspects to emerge. Kobek found Dorr to be an intriguing suspect for a variety of reasons. Dorr's writing resembles the Zodiac's correspondence in that it is both intelligent and violent. He was a member of the Minutemen, a militant right-wing organization whose symbol resembled that of the Zodiac. And Dorr had a background in the military, which some suspect the Zodiac shared. According to reports, Kobek's investigation was so extensive that Dorr's daughter, Gloria, eventually acknowledged that she was impressed with his work. Some have referred to Dorr as the most compelling Zodiac killer suspect in decades, and Paul Haynes, the co-author of the Golden State Killer book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, referred to Dorr as the best Zodiac suspect that's ever surfaced. What makes Dorr such a compelling suspect? The most direct connection between Dorr and the Zodiac is that he matches the physical descriptions of the Zodiac provided by survivors and eyewitnesses. Dorr was 42 years old in 1969, when Zodiac was believed to have been between 35 and 45 years old, of comparable height, sporting a crew cut, and resembling the famous composite portrait of Zodiac created by police officers believed to have seen him. While the photo of a youthful Dorr depicts him without eyeglasses and with a goatee, according to Dorr's daughter Gloria, he wore glasses intermittently throughout his life and alternated between beard and clean-shaven styles. Though Dorr's weight fluctuated throughout the 1970s, he possessed the same stocky physique used to characterize the Zodiac during his crimes. Dorr's resemblance to Zodiac's apparent physical characteristics does not alone make him a primary suspect, but when combined with Kobek's other findings, it undoubtedly adds fuel to the fire. Dorr had a propensity for writing letters to his favorite zines or self-published periodicals, and publishing his own. Zodiac was notorious for sending insulting letters and cards to regional California newspapers. Since many zines were digitized online, Kobek could locate a trove of Dorr's works that exhibit striking similarities to Zodiac in content and writing style. He penned a letter to the San Francisco Examiner without a street address, just as the Zodiac did, and included references to slavery in his correspondence. Dorr and the Zodiac also wrote about the esoteric topic of magnetic poles. Furthermore, an anonymous letter believed to have been written by Zodiac and sent to one of Dorr's favorite zines contains many superficial characteristics of Zodiac's writing style, such as intentional spelling errors and a symbol signature. Dorr, like Zodiac, relished writing lists, used an ellipsis instead of and, frequently wrote sentences in all caps with the exception of lowercase i's, and occasionally used a circle to dot lowercase i's and punctuate sentences. This is without going into the recurring language found in both Dorr and Zodiac's writing, which, while not a blazing gun, merely demonstrates additional shared characteristics between the two. Regarding cryptography and ciphers, the coincidences begin to pile up, and it becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss Dorr as anything other than a highly compelling and serious Zodiac suspect. Only 2 of the 4 cryptograms and ciphers that Zodiac sent to newspapers containing coded messages have been deciphered over 50 years after they were sent. Dorr was so interested in cryptography that he published a cipher in his Tolkien fanzine, Hobbitalia, only 3 days after Zodiac sent his famous Z13 cipher. In conjunction with the other circumstantial evidence discovered by Kobek, the fact that cryptography is a relatively niche field is a very compelling piece of circumstantial evidence. On November 9, 1969, Zodiac infamously sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle threatening to blow up a bus, along with a catalogue of the materials he would use to construct such an incendiary device. In Dorr's zine Pioneer, he included a similar formula for making an explosive, stating that it must be kept dry and emitting one component, a starter, just as Zodiac did. This confirms, at the very least, that Dorr had similar knowledge of explosive materials as the Zodiac. Another possible stretch might be that Dorr enjoyed role-play events, as he frequently attended Renaissance festivals. As part of a historical reenactment, it would plausibly explain, if questioned, why he would have an executioner's hood, as worn by Zodiac when he attacked Brian Hartnell and murdered Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa, in his possession. Coincidentally, there was a Renaissance festival in the San Francisco Bay Area on the same day that Zodiac struck Lake Berryessa. Though highly circumstantial, it is entirely plausible that Dorr attended the fair, even in the same or a similar executioner costume, before driving 2 hours to Lake Berryessa and committing the attack there. Dorr's history of violence also implicates him as a suspect, or at the very least, suggests he is capable of committing heinous acts, such as murder. In a 1974 letter to the editor of his favorite zine, Green Egg, Dorr implied directly that he had murdered people, and in his own zine, Pioneer, he wrote, "The only good enemy is a dead enemy." In addition, Dorr was reportedly discharged from the military after 1 year for attempting to force a fork down someone's throat. Dorr's daughter, Gloria, confirmed that he was a violent man with a history of assaulting her and other family members. The fact that a man is violent does not immediately identify him as a serial killer, but his not-so-cryptic claim in writing that he has murdered someone is highly suspicious. What we've shown you is the most compelling evidence linking Dorr to Zodiac, but it's only the tip of the iceberg of what Kobek discovered in his book. Namely, Gilbert and Sullivan are also referenced in at least 3 of Zodiac's letters, and the artist significantly influenced one of Dorr's 1960s music scenes. Later in life, it was verified that Dorr owned a sky blue 1963 Chevrolet Nova, similar to the one seen at Lake Berryessa on the day of the Zodiac attack. Dorr was on the distribution list of the right-wing militia, the Minutemen, whose logo resembled Zodiac's gun sight. In addition, they distributed the explosive formula duplicated by Dorr and the Zodiac, and instructions on sending anonymous mail and acquiring untraceable weapons. Dorr would have had convenient access to Zodiac's Wing Walker footwear, as he spent decades working at the Mare Island Naval Base in Vallejo. The year after Zodiac used 1-cent stamps to mail a letter, Dorr suggested using them to antagonize the post office for increasing stamp prices. Zodiac and Dorr used the same 8-cent Eisenhower stamp within a year, and Zodiac used an out-of-circulation commemorative stamp for one of his letters, as Dorr did. Dorr mentions the Sierra Club, an American organization that promotes environmental conservation, in numerous issues of Pioneer, as does Zodiac in one of his postcards. Individually, these might be coincidences, but as a collective body of evidence, Dorr should be regarded, at the very least, as a significant person of interest in the Zodiac investigation, based on these facts. Gary Francis Post. Gary Francis Post may have been the Zodiac killer mastermind, according to a group of cold case investigators in 2021, based on his brutal history and strong connection to the serial murders. Who was Gary Francis Post, and why do some people think he is guilty? Gary Francis Post's background is largely unknown. However, his neighbors, acquaintances, and even friends have shared disturbing tales about the man who may be the Zodiac. Post, born in 1937, entered the Air Force as a young man before becoming a house painter. In 1970, he moved to Groveland, California, to marry a local woman with a young child. Post proceeded to establish his questionable reputation there. One of Post's neighbors, Gwen, said he and his wife babysat her during the 1970s and 1980s. She recalled that Post taught her how to shoot a pistol, but also that she saw him being violent toward his wife, and that Post's wife frequently slept on their sofa to avoid him. However, the accusations that Post led a criminal posse of young men in Groveland are more incriminating. Thomas J. Colbert, the leader of the Casebreakers team that first identified Post as a Zodiac suspect, stated that the group consisted of approximately 10 young men, displaying unwavering allegiance to their leader. He taught them how to turn a pipe bomb into a bomb that would blow up houses, Colbert reported. If new cops moved into town, he would have the posse throw rocks into their windows to get them to move out. He was involved in loaning guns out to suicidal people in town. Chris Avery was allegedly a member of Post's posse. He told the case-breakers that Post had a great side but lacked a conscience. "I've seen him kill bears, deer, otter, ferrets," Avery said. "Just anything that lived. He liked to shoot them, watch them fall down. He liked to mess with the carcasses when he was done. He just got bloody." Avery continued, "Post groomed me into a killing machine." Some accounts of Gary Francis Post are disquieting, but does this make him the Zodiac Killer? According to Colbert's staff, there is also concrete evidence linking Post to the notorious killer. Post, according to Colbert and his case-breakers team, comprised of former police officers, military intelligence officers, and journalists, is linked to the Zodiac by several significant clues. Scars on Post's forehead, which the Air Force veteran received in a 1959 automobile accident in Clinton, Indiana, are a clue. The case-breakers note that the Zodiac Killer's wounds resemble those depicted in the suspect's sketches. The case-breakers also discovered Post connections in the Zodiac Killer's enigmatic letters. During his murderous rampage in the 1960s, the killer sent police 4 ciphers, of which only 2 have been deciphered. And according to the investigative team, removing Gary Francis Post's name from one of the ciphers reveals a new message. "To decipher these anagrams, you must know Gary's complete identity," said case-breakers team member Jen Buchholz, a former Army counterintelligence agent. In addition, the case-breakers believe that the Zodiac had 6 victims, not 5. They claim to have discovered evidence connecting Post to the assassination of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California, in 1966. Police discovered a damaged, paint-splattered wristwatch purchased at a military base at the site of Bates' murder. The case-breakers believe that the broken wristwatch connects Post to the crime because he was a house painter with a military background who traveled to the March Air Force Base Hospital just 15 minutes from where Bates was killed. Also found at the crime scene were boot impressions measuring a size 10 that matched those left by the Zodiac. The case-breakers note that Post also donned size 10 shoes. In addition, no one who knew Post refuted the possibility that he was the Zodiac. "He lived a double life," Gwen said. "As an adult thinking back, it all kind of makes sense now. At the time when I was a teenager, I didn't put 2 and 2 together until I got older. It hit me full-blown that Gary's the Zodiac." Gwen even spoke with Post's wife, who regretted not informing the police about her husband's past. This investigation is ongoing, since no evidence has been scrutinized by law enforcement or made public. Our number 1 suspect has to be Arthur Lee Allen. Allen is considered to be one of the most famous Zodiac suspects of all time. Allen was typically well liked by those who knew him, although he was regarded as somewhat eccentric. Born in Honolulu, Hawaii, on December 18, 1933, his relationship with his mother would remain strained throughout his life, as is common in the childhoods of many serial killers. He attended Vallejo College, where he majored in liberal arts and earned an Associate of Arts degree in 1957. He grew up in Vallejo, California, and graduated from Vallejo High School in 1950. From 1951 to 1953, he held a series of maritime-related positions, first as a lifeguard and then as a sailmaker at the Vallejo, California, the location of the Mare Island Naval Shipyard. Don Cheney, a former friend of Allen's, was the one who introduced him to the attention of the authorities. Before the Zodiac murders began, according to Cheney, Allen boasted that he would start murdering people and dubbing himself Zodiac. Allen, a recluse and sex offender, was a favored suspect of both the authorities and author Robert Graysmith, whose books Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked introduced the world to Allen. Allen appears to have taken delight in the attention, despite the negative publicity that made him a suspect in the public's eye. The level of attention paid to Allen as a suspect has resulted in abundant circumstantial evidence against him. As with the other suspects, a couple of coincidences are merely that, coincidence. However, a suspect cannot easily be ruled out when multiple coincidences are discovered. The list of circumstantial evidence implicating Allen is lengthy and contentious. Karen Allen, Allen's sister-in-law, has stated that Allen mutilated animals and insects as a child. Animal cruelty is a prevalent attribute of serial killers. This is one of the 3 characteristics comprising the McDonald Triad, a set of 3 factors, the presence of any 2 of which is believed to be predictive or associated with violent tendencies, especially concerning serial offences. According to John Douglas, a profiler for the FBI and the source character on which Netflix's Manhunter is based, many serial killers aspire to serve in the armed forces or as police officers, but lack the social skills necessary for success. Arthur Lee Allen served in the Navy until 1958, when he was dishonorably discharged for an unknown reason, as well as being rejected by a police department when he applied. Allen tried to obtain his teaching credentials between 1959 and 1962 and was employed by the Santa Rosa Elementary School in Atascadero, California. During this period, he became interested in abnormal psychology and studied mental hygiene at Atascadero State Hospital. Following his conviction in 1974 for the sexual abuse of children, he was dismissed from his position as a teacher at Travis Elementary. He was found guilty and sentenced to 3 years in Atascadero State Hospital, where he studied. Allen was also reprimanded at Travis Elementary on Travis Air Force Base after he was discovered with a loaded firearm in his vehicle on school premises. Allen used only 1 sick day during his time as a teacher. Cherry Jo Bates was murdered at Riverside City College on this date. This is not an official Zodiac homicide, but many people familiar with the case consider Bates to be the first Zodiac victim. Michael Magoo, who survived being shot at close range by the Zodiac in the face, neck, and torso, identified Arthur Lee Allen from a lineup of photos. Nevertheless, the lineup took place 22 years after the attack. Allen also had access to the type of vehicle described by Magoo as the one the Zodiac arrived in before the attack. Allen's shoe size matched prints discovered at the Zodiac crime locations. Allen owned a Zodiac watch from which the Zodiac symbol is believed to have originated. Investigators also believed that Allen's walking gait was comparable to that described by Zodiac victims, so much that Brian Hartnell, another Zodiac survivor, concurred that Allen's accent, stature, and walk matched those of the Zodiac. Allen's friendship with Don Chaney spanned 6 years. Chaney stated that the friendship ended because he was disturbed by the possibility that Allen was the Zodiac killer. Chaney eventually went to the police and informed them that Allen had confessed to fantasizing about murdering couples at random, that he wished to be called Zodiac, that he signed his letters with the same symbol the Zodiac used, that he affixed his floodlight to his pistol like the Zodiac, and that he described preying on women by sabotaging their vehicle in a manner similar to Kathleen Johns and possibly Cherry Jo Bates. Allen went on to admit to investigators that his favorite book was The Most Dangerous Game, a short story about a wealthy big game hunter who grows bored of hunting animals and begins hunting humans. This book appears in one of the Zodiac ciphers. Allen was fascinated by the concept of hunting humans, according to a second Allen associate. There is evidence that Arthur Lee Allen may have been stalking Darlene Ferrin, a victim of the Zodiac killer. He told Don Chaney that he had a crush on a waitress at the restaurant where she worked, and that she had mentioned a man named Lee to others. Allen told police he was going to Lake Berryessa on the day of the attack, but changed his mind. He also stated he had bloody knives in his trunk that he used to slaughter chickens on the day of the attack. A search of Allen's residence revealed that he had created explosive blueprints. The Zodiac letters made reference to this form of explosive. Allen also became a suspect in several murders, known as the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders. On December 14, 1972, the frozen remains of a young girl were discovered in a ravine near Calistoga Road in Santa Rosa. The body had been thrown at least 30 feet over an embankment, and a fractured neck with spinal cord compression and hemorrhaging caused her death. The victim had likely died 1 to 2 weeks before discovery. She was identified as Lori Lee Kurzer, a 13-year-old student at Lawrence Cook Middle School, whose mother had reported her missing on November 11, 1972. A little over a week later, on December 22, 1972, the bodies of two young girls were discovered approximately 2.2 miles north of Porter Creek Road on Franz Valley Road, down a steep embankment. Due to advanced decomposition, it was impossible to determine the cause of death from the skeletal remains. In the next 12 months, 5 more young women would either vanish or be discovered brutally murdered. These crimes, known collectively as the Sonoma Co-ed murders, or more commonly the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, remain unsolved to this day. Allen was never considered a suspect in the murders, but circumstantial evidence points to his possible involvement. During Allen's time in Sonoma County, it appears that the Zodiac homicides ceased just before the start of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. Allen's enormous physique would enable him to throw bodies down these ravines with minimal exertion. Jim Silver, a retired special agent with the California Department of Justice, stated that if the locations where the co-ed victims were last seen and where they were subsequently discovered were plotted on a map, Allen's trailer would be in the exact center. Nonetheless, there is scant evidence linking Allen to these homicides. Allen was rearrested for offenses against a juvenile on March 13, 1975, and sentenced to Atascadero State Hospital for the criminally insane. During his stay there, Zodiac did not commit any more crimes. On August 26, 1992, the body of Allen was discovered by a female roommate who lived above him. After an autopsy, it was established that Allen had passed away due to arteriosclerotic heart failure. 2 days after his death, the Vallejo police executed a second search warrant at his residence and seized property. During the new search, detectives examined Allen's new computer and discovered numerous Zodiac-labeled floppy disks. They also noticed a videotape inscribed with the letter Z on a bookshelf. They obtained a warrant to view it because they believed it might contain incriminating information. They played it as soon as they could, only to discover Allen mooning the police, abusing them, and ranting about the Zodiac case. When the police searched the house, they found that he had everything the investigators believed the Zodiac would have, including a portable typewriter, an inventory of firearms, explosives, blades, and other weapons. According to his profile, Allen had developed a loathing for women and a sexual interest in minors. Allen had always been a plausible candidate for the Zodiac killings. He matched the description, and it was for this reason that law enforcement returned to him time and time again during their investigation. In 2002, the SFPD retrieved saliva from the stamps and envelopes of the Zodiac's letters to create a partial DNA profile. This was compared to Allen's DNA and Don Chaney. Allen and Chaney were ruled out as possible contributors of the DNA on the stamps and envelopes because neither test result indicated a match. However, this does not preclude Allen from being the Zodiac. It merely eliminates him as the person who licked the seals on Zodiac's correspondence. Allen will continue to be a primary suspect in the Zodiac murders unless new evidence arises exonerating him. Throughout the investigation, there have been numerous developments, including the solution to one of the Zodiac ciphers and plausible suspects proposed as recently as 2021. Still, none have been officially acknowledged by law enforcement and investigators. The only way the Zodiac case will ever be solved is through an innovation in DNA, similar to how the Golden State Killer was apprehended, or if the perpetrator leaves behind evidence or a confession after their death. The case will remain one of the most notorious unsolved serial murder investigations until then. Who do you think the Zodiac Killer is? Will he or they ever be identified, or will their identity be a mystery forever? We would love to hear your opinion on this fascinating case. It is a fundamental principle of the American legal system and a literary cliché that people are presumed innocent until proven guilty, but it was easy to assume the worst of fertilizer salesman Scott Peterson after his wife Lacey and their unborn son Connor mysteriously vanished in late 2002. After all, this was the man who told his mistress that his pregnant wife had already died, gave contradictory statements about what he was doing the day she was reported missing, was seen laughing at Lacey's candlelight vigil, and sold her car weeks before her body was found. In November 2004, a jury found Peterson guilty of the double homicide, confirming the public's suspicions regarding his strange and unempathetic behavior. In today's video, we are going to have a look at a timeline of events in this tragic case and give our bad things view on what most likely happened and why. December 24th, 2002. Lacey is reported missing. Peterson tells police that he last saw Lacey, who was nearly 8 months pregnant, at their Modesto, California residence about 9:30 a.m. that morning before leaving to go fishing, prompting a mammoth search involving local, state, and federal authorities, as well as volunteer searchers. Peterson soon attracts the attention of investigators, who note his lack of concern over his wife's disappearance and his contradictory stories of events of the day she went missing. January 24th, 2003. Amber Frey discloses her relationship with Peterson. Amber Frey had been quoted as saying to the media that she began dating Scott for 2 months without being aware that he was already married. She contacted the police on December 30th after realizing that her boyfriend was connected to the missing woman from the news. March 5th, 2003. Lacey's case is reclassified as a homicide. Authorities do not explain the transition from a missing person inquiry to a violent crime investigation, other than a statement saying that they had increasingly come to believe that Lacey is the victim of a violent crime. April 13th and 14th, 2003. The remains of a woman and fetus are found. A day after the body of a fetus is discovered on the coastline of the San Francisco Bay, the decomposing corpse of a woman is discovered nearby, approximately 2 to 3 miles north of the Berkeley Marina, where Peterson claimed to have gone fishing on Christmas Eve of the previous year. April 18th, 2003. Peterson is arrested, and the bodies are identified as Lacey and Connor. Scott is apprehended in La Jolla, California, near his mother's home in San Diego and the Mexican border. He is driving a vehicle that contains approximately $15,000 in cash, his brother's identification card, and multiple mobile phones. He had also tried to change his appearance by dyeing his hair blonde and growing a goatee. April 21st, 2003. Peterson pleads not guilty. Peterson pleads not guilty to 2 counts of capital murder during a brief arraignment at Stanislaus County Superior Court. November 18th, 2003. Peterson is ordered to stand trial. After 11 days of testimony from investigators, family members, and neighbors in a preliminary hearing, Judge Aldo Girolami concludes that prosecutors have shown probable cause and ordered that Peterson stand trial for double homicide. January 20th, 2004. The trial is moved to San Mateo County. Judge Girolami declares that the trial will be relocated 90 miles away to San Mateo County, since Peterson's hometown was no longer a viable venue for a fair trial due to the immense publicity the trial was generating. June 1st, 2004. Peterson's trial begins. The trial begins with the prosecution's opening statement, which asserts that Peterson wanted a life free of responsibility by murdering his wife and unborn son and discarding her corpse in the bay. August 10th, 2004. Frey delivers her crucial testimony. Frey, on the first day of her 7-day testimony, recalls the details of her fairy tale first date with Peterson. Her accounts are reinforced by 12 hours of recorded phone interactions that were played to the jury. November 3rd, 2004. Jury deliberations begin. Peterson's fate is left to the jury after 5 months and more than 180 witnesses have testified. November 12th, 2004. Peterson is found guilty. Peterson is judged guilty of first-degree murder for the death of Laci and second-degree murder for the death of Connor, despite the absence of a murder weapon or any tangible evidence linking him to the murders. The announcement elicits audible murmurs in the courtroom and a jubilant cry from the crowd assembled outside. December 13, 2004. The jury recommends a death sentence. After 11 hours of deliberation, the court registrar announces that the jury of 6 men and 6 women voted unanimously to fix the penalty at death. March 16, 2005. The judge sentences Peterson to death. Judge DeLucci sentences Scott to death by lethal injection. Peterson remains stoic throughout the sentencing, declines to make a statement before being transported to San Quentin State Prison. July 5, 2012. Peterson files an appeal. In a 423-page document submitted to the California Supreme Court, Peterson's attorney resurrects the argument that his client's chances of receiving a fair trial were diminished due to extensive publicity. In addition, he asserts that Judge DeLucci erred by excluding prospective jurors who opposed the death penalty but said they would consider imposing it, and that certain evidence such as the findings of a police dog with a poor track record should never have been admitted as evidence. November 24, 2015. Peterson files a second appeal. The habeas corpus petition covers many of the same grounds as Scott's previous appeal, with one major exception. It reveals that Juror Nice, one of the late trial replacements, lied about an earlier involvement in legal proceedings by failing to disclose that she had been threatened by her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend while pregnant. August 24, 2020. Peterson's death sentence is overturned. The California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence after agreeing with his argument that prospective jurors were improperly disqualified for their opposition to the death penalty, but a willingness to adhere to it. However, the court rejects his claim that he was denied a fair trial and upholds his conviction of homicide. October 14, 2020. Peterson's convictions are ordered re-examined. Focusing on the prejudicial misconduct of Nice's failure to disclose her prior legal issues, the California Supreme Court announces that the case will be returned to the San Mateo County Superior Court to determine if a new trial is necessary. October 23, 2020. Prosecutors announce plans to pursue the same course of action. Assistant District Attorney Dave Harris, according to a spokesman for Stanislaus County, intends to pursue the death penalty for Peterson again. Pat Harris, the counsel for Peterson, tells reporters, "An innocent man's been sitting in jail for 15 years. It's time to get him out." November 6, 2020. Peterson declines a speedy trial. Scott waives his right to an expeditious trial in the penalty phase of his case during a Zoom hearing in San Mateo Superior Court, paving the way for a new chapter in his protracted legal saga. December 8, 2021. Peterson is resentenced. Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole by a California judge. Scott Peterson has never admitted to murdering his pregnant wife and unborn child. He and his family have always maintained innocence. In addition to repeatedly cheating on his young wife, Peterson displayed a peculiar demeanor during his trials. Those who observed Peterson's trials reported that he often appeared emotionless and even sociopathic. Peterson blamed the court for labeling him a terrible person due to his affairs and contends that because he was a cheater does not make him a murderer. What most likely happened to Laci Peterson, and why would Scott Peterson commit this heinous crime? Our What Most Likely Happened is a straightforward case of uxoricide, or the killing of one's wife. Peterson murdered his pregnant wife, Laci Rosha Peterson, on the evening of December 23, 2002, or the morning of December 24, 2002, using a non-bloody method such as suffocation or strangulation. Then he transported her 90 miles away from their home to the Berkeley Marina and discarded her body from his unregistered, cash-purchased and secret fishing boat. Peterson tried to cover his tracks, but in all honesty, his attempts could have filled a whole season of America's Dumbest Criminals. 5 months after Laci went missing, her torso and that of her son washed up on the shores of the San Francisco Bay, only 1 to 2 miles from where Scott said he had been fishing on that fateful day. Her head, hands, limbs, and feet were missing. According to the prosecution, Laci's corpse was weighed down by concrete anchors made by Peterson, causing only her torso to pull free from the anchors and surface. The circumstantial evidence clearly points to Peterson's guilt. In 1994, while working as a waiter in college, Scott met Laci Rocha. The couple moved in together in 1996. In 1997, Laci earned a degree in ornamental horticulture and the couple wed. Later, Scott returned to school and earned his degree in 1998. During this period, Scott had several extramarital affairs, one of which Laci was aware of. In 2000, with plans to start a family, the Petersons bought a property in a pleasant neighborhood in Modesto. Scott started selling fertilizer, while Laci began working as a substitute teacher. Following 18 to 24 months of fertility problems, the couple conceived their first child, a boy who was due on February 10, 2003. On December 24th, only 6 weeks before Connor's delivery date, Laci disappeared. According to judicial documents, money was limited in the household at the time of Laci's disappearance. Scott and Laci both liberally spent their limited disposable income and had less than $2,000 in savings. However, this fact was not widely known among acquaintances and family, neither was Peterson's repeated adultery. Many people believe that Scott's affair with Amber Frey was his only one while he was married to Laci. This is a misconception. Peterson engaged in at least 4 affairs while married to Laci. Peterson was an accomplished liar, and this would become clear during the investigation into Laci's disappearance. When Peterson's strange behavior and observations by investigators are put together, the case against Peterson seemed clear-cut. The following are just a small percentage of the inconsistencies in Peterson's account of the disappearance and circumstantial evidence found by investigators. According to Peterson, Laci was supposed to be walking the dog when he last saw her, but according to her obstetrician, yoga instructor and neighbors, she had not been walking due to her advanced pregnancy. After Peterson's iconic "Hey Beautiful" call at 2:15 p.m., he never called Laci's cell phone again, even though he knew she was missing. Peterson returned home to find the house empty, Laci's car in the driveway, and a dog on the leash in the backyard. Instead of trying to contact his wife, Peterson emptied dirty mop and bucket water and placed the mops outside, took off all of his clothing and washed them. He made himself something to eat. He showered. Only then did he call Laci's mother and questioned the neighbors. Even after this, it was Laci's stepfather who called the police, not Peterson. When patrol officers arrived at the residence, they observed several peculiar characteristics. The scene was so peculiar that the officers contacted their sergeant, who concurred that homicide detectives should be contacted. Outside the door, the detectives discovered 2 mops and a moist bucket. Additionally, the floor appeared to have been recently mopped. The sidewalk was also damp. On the kitchen counter, there was an open phone book with a full-page advertisement for a criminal defense lawyer. They noticed a rug near the back door that appeared to have had something heavy dragged over it. As soon as he saw it, Peterson straightened it out. When questioned about his morning, Peterson responded, "I was fishing," and gave Detective Spurlock his parking receipt, despite not being asked for it. He then engaged in this conversation with Spurlock, an avid angler. Spurlock: "What did you go fishing for?" Peterson: "No answer." Spurlock: "What did you use for bait?" Peterson: First a pause. "Some type of silver lure." Spurlock: "Where do you keep your fishing stuff?" Peterson: "I keep it at my company's storage facility." Peterson later approached Spurlock and said, "Sturgeon. Once homicide detective Al Bracini arrived at the scene, he noticed several other odd things in the house. Bracini observed a 5-foot-long impression on the bed that he found peculiar because it resembled the shape of a corpse. Peterson told investigators that they could investigate his warehouse, but it would be difficult due to the lack of electricity. A later search warrant found that to be false, as the warehouse had electricity, including fluorescent lighting overhead. Concrete debris was discovered in Peterson's boat and truck bed. The prosecution asserts that this debris was from the concrete anchors Peterson made to weigh Laci's body down in the San Francisco Bay. A minor laceration was seen on Peterson's knuckle. Despite having limited funds, Peterson paid cash for a boat on December the 9th. Peterson did not register the vessel, and neither Peterson's family nor his acquaintances knew about the boat. The boat was first used on the 24th of December. Peterson did not decide to go fishing that morning. He purchased a 2-day fishing license for December 23rd to 24th. Peterson did not open the fishing lures he had bought. They were found in his vehicle unopened. Peterson went fishing 90 miles from his home, despite having plans and errands to run that evening. Peterson could have fished in 9 other locations, but he chose Berkeley Marina, where he fished for less than an hour before leaving. During his interview, Peterson denied that he and Laci had marital problems and stated that neither of them had ever had an affair. During his first interview, Scott exclusively used the past tense when referring to Laci. Peterson asked Bracini for contact information for bereavement counselors, even though Laci had been missing for only a few hours. Neighbor Karen Service spoke with Peterson on the evening of the 24th when he was searching for Laci. Peterson informed her that he had spent the day golfing, not fishing. Peterson contacted Detective Bracini to inquire about the status of the search for Laci. Peterson inquired, "Have you used cadaver dogs yet?" Bracini replied, "Cadaver dogs are used for sniffing out dead bodies. Have you given up hope on finding Laci alive?" Peterson did not reply. Laci had been missing for less than 24 hours at this point. This was the only occasion Scott contacted law enforcement regarding his missing wife. With all of these inconsistencies, search warrants were executed on Scott's residence, place of business, and both vehicles. The shoes Peterson claimed Laci wore while walking were discovered in the residence. A comforter was taken into evidence because it had 2 droplets of blood near the foot of the bed. It was later found that the blood was Peterson's. A pair of corroded pliers with black hair adhered to them were discovered on Peterson's boat. Later analysis revealed that the hair was identical to Laci's. A cadaver dog detected Laci's scent on the boat and boat trailer in the warehouse. Debris from dry concrete and a water container with concrete detritus on the bottom were discovered in Peterson's warehouse. 4 circular imprints formed by concrete residue were found on the ground in the warehouse and the boat trailer. The rings were the exact same size as the concrete boat anchor Scott had created. Peterson's personal and work computers were confiscated after it was discovered that he had been researching tidal activity in the vicinity of the Berkeley Marina as early as December 8th. For weeks, Scott did not cooperate with the Modesto Police Department's request to get Laci's dental records. He made excuses such as not knowing the address or forgetting which dentist she saw. The records obtained by the authorities revealed that Scott and Laci visited the same dentist. Many true crime enthusiasts and mental health professionals have tried to figure out why Peterson committed this nonsensical crime. Aphrodite Jones, a woman who eats, sleeps, and breathes true crime, has her opinion on the motive. Scott and Laci Peterson were the seemingly perfect all-American couple. Yet, according to the true crime author, reporter, and television producer, Peterson had too much of it all, particularly when he discovered he would become a father. Most people have said that Scott just wanted to get away from the marriage, but the murder of Laci Peterson was all about the unborn baby, Jones said. Jones stated that, in her opinion, Peterson was, and always will be, a prototypical sociopath. In the eyes of his parents, he was the golden boy of his family and could do no wrong. Peterson had been adored and praised since birth, but with a new infant on the way, he would no longer be the center of attention, at least not in the way he had become accustomed to. The excessive attention combined with Scott's narcissistic and sociopathic traits created a ticking time bomb that detonated when he realized he would no longer be the top priority after the birth of his son Connor. It wasn't Amber Frey, Jones continued. He only knew her 2.5 weeks. He was a serial cheater and had been caught before. No, this was about baby Connor. Scott played the role so well that he had everyone around him fooled, even Lacey. He couldn't handle the attention being taken away from him. This wasn't about Lacey, it was about getting rid of the baby. Do you agree with this opinion? Or do you think Peterson killed Lacey so that he could carry on with his playboy single life? Leave us a comment below, we would love to hear from you. Lindbergh kidnapping. What most likely happened? On the 3rd of April 1936, just before his execution in the electric chair at the New Jersey State Prison, a convicted kidnapper and child killer made his final statement. "You think when I die, it will be like a book I close. But the book, it will never close." These words seem almost prophetic, almost 90 years after what was dubbed as the crime of the century. The book on this case is still open, and we will give you a page-by-page rundown of the man convicted of murdering a defenseless toddler and the man many now think committed the crime. Stay tuned for some shocking revelations in the case that ranks right up there as one of the world's most famous true crime stories. The Lindbergh baby murder investigation is one of the most notorious in American history. On the evening of the 1st of March 1932, Charles Lindbergh's 20-month-old son was abducted from the family's New Jersey home. 2 months and a few miles away, despite a massive manhunt and a ransom payment, the child's remains were found. The investigation into the crime became a media phenomenon, and a suspect was apprehended and tried. The defendant was found guilty and sentenced to death. However, doubts have persisted over the years about whether he was genuinely accountable or a convenient scapegoat. Charles Lindbergh was an American aircraft, military commander, novelist, engineer, activist, and inventor. Lindbergh made the first non-stop flight from New York City to Paris in 33.5 hours on May 20th to 21st, 1927. It is considered one of the most significant voyages in history and ushered in a new era of intercontinental aviation travel. After his historic flight, Lindbergh received unparalleled acclaim. Biographer A. Scott Berg said people were behaving as though Lindbergh had walked on water, not flown over it, and with this achievement, he rose from virtual obscurity to instantaneous global fame, transitioning from an eccentric recluse into an adored public figure. Anne Morrow Lindbergh was the daughter of J.P. Morgan & Co. partner Dwight Morrow. Lindbergh met Anne in Mexico City in December 1927, after Morrow invited him on a goodwill tour to Mexico. The couple wed on the 27th of May 1929 at the Morrow estate in Englewood, New Jersey, where they resided for a time before relocating to their residence in the western part of the state. As an early example of paparazzi-style celebrity coverage, newspapers reported on Lindbergh's every move. Americans celebrated the birth of their son, Charles A. Lindbergh Jr., much as when a new royal is born today. The press could not stop publishing articles about Charles and Anne, and the public lapped up every piece of it. Charles Jr. was born in June 1930, a year after his parents' marriage. Baby Lindy, as he became known, was adored by the public, just like his illustrious parents. The Lindberghs were at their home in East Amwell, New Jersey on the 1st of March 1932 at around 10 p.m. when the baby's nurse asked Anne if she had her son with her. Anne was getting out of her bath and didn't have the baby. The nurse then informed Charles that she could not find the infant. They discovered he wasn't there when they searched the child's room. Charles found a small envelope near the window. It contained a ransom note. The Lindberghs immediately contacted law enforcement and their attorney. The investigators discovered the remnants of a handcrafted wooden ladder leading directly up to the child's second-floor window. By the time daylight rolled around, word of the boy's abduction had spread like wildfire. The New Jersey State Police assumed jurisdiction, and the police superintendent, Colonel Norman Schwarzkopf, the father of the famous military general during the Gulf War, allowed Charles to lead the investigation into the abduction of his own son. This was unusual even then, but Lindbergh's wealth and connections helped him persuade the authorities to let him participate in the investigation. The only tangible evidence the authorities had was the ransom note and the improvised ladder. The investigators presumed the ladder broke when the kidnapper attempted his descent down it. According to the FBI's archives, the ransom note featured atypical writing choices. For instance, the initial ransom amount of $50,000 included a $sign after the quantity, which is uncommon in English. Investigators concluded that the author was not a native English speaker. The phrase, "the child is in good care," was written on the note. This appeared to suggest that the author was possibly German, as gut is the German word for good. The perpetrator sent several more ransom notes containing similar typographical errors and anomalies, such as bode instead of boat. Most peculiar was the note's signature. It was not a typical signature, but an ominous symbol consisting of interlocking blue and red circles and 3 holes struck through the paper. The ransom note stated that this symbol would appear on future letters from the abductor, and indeed, perforations in the paper were present in subsequent correspondence. Al Capone, a notorious mobster, was among those who offered their assistance in the Lindbergh kidnapping. Dr. John Condon, a man in his 70s, was another of these individuals. He placed an advertisement in the newspaper offering $1,000 of his own money to the kidnapper in exchange for acting as a liaison between them and the Lindberghs. Amazingly, the kidnapper responded the next day by sending Condon a letter. The letter stated that the kidnapper would consent to use Condon as their liaison and requested that he contact Lindbergh about getting the ransom money. The letter contained the enigmatic symbol seen on the original ransom note, proving that it was sent by the kidnapper. Condon reached out to Lindbergh regarding this new letter, and Lindbergh not only accepted but also worked directly with Condon, showing him items belonging to his son so that Condon could identify him if necessary. The kidnapper and Condon began a complex string of back-and-forth communication using newspaper classified ads and paid minicab drivers. While the initial ransom was $50,000, the kidnapper later changed their mind and demanded an additional $20,000 in exchange for Charles Jr.'s safe return. In 2020 dollars, this ransom would exceed $1,200,000. On the 12th of March 1932, Dr. Condon's doorbell rang, and he received another note from a person hired by the kidnapper. It instructed him to visit a vacant local hot dog stand, where he would discover a second note under a rock. It instructed him to meet at the cemetery on the opposite side of the street. Condon sat and spoke with a man with a handkerchief over his face and a German accent in the graveyard. He called himself John, and the press later labeled him Cemetery John. Cemetery John asked Condon offhandedly, "What if the baby is dead? Would I burn if the baby is dead?" Condon was alarmed, but Cemetery John assured him that the infant was still alive and that he would send the infant's pajamas as evidence. Cemetery John left, and the baby's sleepwear from the night of the abduction was sent to Condon and Lindbergh several days later. On the 30th of March 1932, Condon received another letter from the abductor. Impatient, they instructed Condon and the Lindberghs to have the money ready within 4 days. With the assistance of the Internal Revenue Service, they raised the initial ransom amount of $50,000. Despite being $20,000 short, They made plans to meet the kidnapper. On the 2nd of April 1932, Dr. Condon met with the man for the second time in a cemetery. Instead of returning the child after receiving the money, Cemetery John gave Condon yet another note. This one stated the infant was secure on the Nellie yacht off the Massachusetts coast. Lindbergh flew for hours over the specified area in search of the yacht, but found nothing. The kidnapper had lied. The Lindberghs and Dr. Condon never heard from the kidnapper again after this. 6 weeks later, on the 12th of May 1932, a truck driver named William Allen stopped along the roadside near some woods to relieve himself. When Allen saw a young body sticking out of the ground, he immediately called the authorities. They investigated and verified that the body was that of Charles Jr., buried less than a mile from the Lindbergh home in a shallow grave. He had been dead since the night of his abduction. Medical examiners determined that blunt force trauma to the skull caused the child's death. They surmised that he was dropped when the abductor departed the Lindbergh residence and the ladder broke. Shortly after that, Charles and Anne sold their home and moved away from the house that now held so many terrible memories. The media and the public reacted with astonishment and grief to the news. The police had no leads. The trail was lost after the discovery of baby Lindy's remains, and the kidnapper had vanished. However, the IRS had a plan. They had copied the serial numbers of the ransom money, which included gold certificates, which were rarer than regular currency due to their phasing out. Unfortunately, serial numbers could not be flagged back then. 2.5 years later, in the autumn of 1934, copying the serial numbers paid off. A teller at the Bronx Corn Exchange Bank discovered a gold bill with a license plate number inscribed in the margin. The teller contacted the police after suspecting this was suspicious. The receipt was traced back to a gas station. The proprietor noted the license plate of the man who gave him the note because he made a strange remark during the transaction. The man replied, "I only have about 100 left," in response to the proprietor's observation that fewer gold notes were in circulation. Using the license plate number, police apprehended Bruno Hauptmann, a German carpenter. They discovered $15,000 with serial numbers matching the ransom money. Dr. Condon's phone number inscribed on a wall later proved to have been written by a journalist, and a missing board in the attic that matched the improvised ladder discovered outside the Lindberghs' home. The Hauptmann trial was a media spectacle unlike any other seen up until then. Newspapers labeled it the trial of the century. Hauptmann maintained his innocence throughout the investigation. His alibi for the most incriminating evidence, the ransom bills, was that a friend named Isidor Fisch left them at his house. Fisch, a fellow German, allegedly requested that Hauptmann safeguard his possessions while he visited Germany. Fisch died of tuberculosis shortly after arriving in Germany, and Hauptmann decided to examine the contents of the crates Fisch had left behind after learning of his death. He claimed to have discovered the ransom money in these crates. While this cast doubt on a critical element of the prosecution's case, they proceeded with dozens of witnesses, including Lindbergh and Dr. Condon, experts in handwriting analysis and timber identification. They also presented Hauptmann's journal, where the word boat was misspelled as bode, similar to the ransom notes. Hauptmann was found guilty and given the death penalty. He maintained his innocence despite offers to spare his life in exchange for a confession. Hauptmann was executed in the electric chair on the 3rd of April 1936, just 4 years after the passing of Charles Jr. Starting before Hauptmann's execution and continuing to the present day, persistent theories of his innocence persist. Until his apprehension 3 years after the crime, none of the investigators believed that one person could have committed this audacious crime alone. And despite Hauptmann's conviction, there was never any credible evidence linking him to the Lindbergh residence on the night the child was abducted. Who else could have committed this heinous crime? Until recently, no one ever seriously considered the principal suspects when a child has been murdered: the parents. Given Lindbergh's status as a global icon, investigators in 1932 never contemplated the unthinkable, that he was a suspect in his son's death. The circumstantial evidence against Lindbergh in his son's death is compelling, complex, exasperating, tenacious, and enigmatic. Lindbergh is portrayed as a god in every biography written on him and is still revered as a great American icon. Lindbergh was, in reality, a bigoted and misogynistic man. His well-known preoccupation with order, routine, and privacy would eventually overwhelm his daily existence and the investigation into his missing son. Lindbergh's actions and behavior on the night and during the investigation have come under intense scrutiny, as some things don't add up. Lindbergh stipulated that his son would be put to bed at 8 p.m. and that no one would disturb him or enter the nursery until 10 p.m. During this time, the kidnapping occurred. Lindbergh was expected to attend the NYU alum banquet, but failed to appear. On the night his son was abducted, he reneged on an assurance despite his reputation for dependability. He told Anne that he heard wood breaking outside, but Anne, the 3 servants, and the ordinarily vigilant family watchdog Wagush heard nothing that night. At 10 p.m., when the child's nurse discovered the empty cot, she and Anne presumed Lindbergh had taken the child as a practical joke, as he had done several weeks earlier by hiding the child in a closet for hours. When Lindbergh saw the empty bassinet, he made an announcement. "Anne, they stole our baby." Lindbergh planted the seed that his son had been abducted before searching the residence for the child. Anne and the servants began to search the house in the nursery, but none of them discovered the ransom note on the window ledge. However, Lindbergh found it upon returning alone to the nursery. Handwriting experts agreed that this first note was distinct from the other 13 ransom notes, indicating that it was written under duress, and an attempt was made to conceal the handwriting. Lindbergh placed himself in charge of the investigation and demanded that the New Jersey State Police turn over all their evidence to him. At one point, he threatened to kill any law enforcement officer who disobeyed this order. When J. Edgar Hoover dispatched 2 FBI agents to assist with the investigation, Lindbergh refused the agency's assistance, whose experience and training gave them the best chance of recovering his son. Lindbergh ignored the FBI, but enlisted the aid of numerous quacks, tipsters, mediums, and gangsters, while obstructing every logical police procedure that could have yielded helpful information. Lindbergh substituted effective investigative techniques with his own, obscuring the trial, generating false leads away from his home, and implementing deceptive actions. Lindbergh denied a proposal by the New York Police Department to stake out the ransom delivery at the cemetery. Lindbergh justified his actions by claiming he did not want to risk his son's safe return. However, ransom notes never mentioned the child because the extortionists never possessed the infant. Was the Lindbergh infant's death an accident that his father would cover up during one of his hiding the baby pranks? Lindbergh said in the Spirit of St. Louis trip, "The important thing is to start, to lay a plan and then follow it step by step, no matter how small or large each one by itself may seem." Charles Lindbergh had the temperament and intelligence to rapidly formulate and execute a cover-up if he unintentionally killed his son, even if it meant putting an innocent man to death by electrocution.